Hello guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Homura, Kazehana, Tsukiumi and Uzume? Part 2. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Naruto laid Yugen upon his bed just as he had when he first found her. He really hoped this wasn't going to be a recurring issue, her getting badly injured and in need of tending. For the first time since he had unburied her, he looked at her. Truly looked at her. This woman was connected to him now, no matter what he thought about the situation. While he still had no idea what that entailed, he was positive it was nothing to sneeze at. Yugen had told him just how sacred a covenant the Namikaze bond was to her race. She had told him what it could do to her. How it could change who Yugen was as a person. He truly wished that she was able to overcome whatever urge the bond may place upon her and stay the same. The thought that someone's one life and conscious mind could be poisoned by falsified emotions unnerved him greatly. Naruto's thoughts were brought to their time together, his eyes drinking in her form. He ran his hand through her hair once, the soft, silky feeling almost making him want to continue his ministrations. He had never seen hair like hers, the closest he had ever seen to this shade was possibly his fellow Jinchuriki FK or the damnable S-rank shinobi Zetsu. As he brushed the bangs that fell between her eyes and down her face aside, it gave him a full view of her visage. The details of her face were breathtaking. Her small nose was cute, her amber eyes were gorgeous, her supple lips tempting, thin eyebrows contrasting her skin wonderfully, and heart-shaped face made for one of the prettiest women he had ever seen. His eyes trailed down past her slim neck and lithe shoulders to her, assets. Tsunade would have been given a run for her money by the size of Yugen's friests. He, of course, hadn't been paying attention, thank you very much, but something told him that despite their size, they must be employing anti-gravity Sekirei powers or something to not sag and stay so perky and firm. Her arms were toned for a female, not the twigs that some women nowadays had that would never have flown back in his day, making it obvious that she did train physically, in spite of being an elemental user. Her hands were thin, and he had discovered earlier in the day that they were quite soft. She had such pretty fingers, long and slender. Yugen's body sloped down into a willowy waist before widening out into voluptuous hips, completing her hergless figure. Yet again, he hadn't been looking, but she had a round, sexy butt that would drive any sane man into a canon Manaka rambling about the face of the gods. Just watching her walk. His eyes journeyed further down her body, reaching her plump thighs. Her pants, they were really his, but that was beside the point, had been torn asunder in the earlier confrontation, exposing the smooth creamy white skin to the open air. Her calves arched in a way that was decidedly pleasant, though he had never actually thought about someone's calves in such a way. Somehow they gave her figure even more appeal than it already had. His journey came to an end as his gaze finally reached her thin feet, unshod once again in the fight. Naruto had to wonder if all Sekirei were this angelic. Hokage was beautiful too, though it had been marred by her homicidal rage fest. Naruto looked away. He had long since decided that involving himself too deeply in mortal affairs was dangerous. That was something he had learned the hard way several times. No matter how much he washed his hands, they were never anything less than plague. He sighed to himself. Damn you boredom and damn you earlier me for letting curiosity get the better of you. Now you're no better than the cat. He jumped when he felt a hand grab his forearm. Slowing the pulse of his beating heart, Naruto traced back down the hand to a barely conscious Yugen, her honey-colored eyes half-lidded and glassy. The words that came next were barely a whisper, but Naruto heard them nonetheless. I'm glad you're okay, Naruto. Yugen's eyes shut and her breath slowed down, once more returning to the realm of slumber. Naruto stared at her for several seconds before chuckling, though it was more of a huff. Silly girl, you should be more worried about yourself than me. I truly hope this bond isn't turning your mind delusional. A ringing passed through the silent room, breaking the atmosphere. Reaching into his pocket, Naruto fished out the burner phone Manaka's agent had given him. Stepping outside, he answered the call. Hello? A jovial voice came through the speaker. Is this Namikaze Naruto-san? This is he, Naruto responded. Ah, good. My name is Sasuke Kazehana, the CEO wanted to thank you for your choice to join this game and congratulate you on your inauguration. He asked me to provide you some basic information about the nature of this game. Before I proceed, did your Sekirei give you any details about this prior to her winging? Be sure to tell Manaka thank you for me. Before I answer your question, would there be an issue if she had disclosed anything previously? No. While there are usually repercussions for such disturbances, the CEO has ordered a nullification of any incurred penalty. Number 66 will not be harmed. Naruto hummed lightly. He believed himself to be relatively decent at discerning the truth of another's words, and Kazehana had answered too naturally for it to be a lie. Plus, they really didn't have much of a reason to lie in the first place. Naruto could handle the situation if he turned out to be wrong. I see. That's good to hear. Once again, be sure to thank Minaka on my behalf. He has been most accommodating thus far. Yes, she informed me of some things. Not anything particularly special, simply the nature of her race and the basics of the plan. She mentioned on several occasions that there were some things I did not need to be made aware of because I was not an Ashikabi. I'll be sure to convey your words, Naruto-san. Number 66 explaining some things will save me time, and she as a Sekirei would know their functionality better than anyone. Now, I suppose I'll start with the nature of their number. To be quite honest, I am not sure exactly how many Sekirei are in this game. The only ones alive who know are the CEO and his assistant, Sahashi Takami. We who are not in the know believe there are somewhere within the ballpark of 100 in total. On top of that, the numbers have fluctuated over their time in the lab, causing discrepancies. For example, one child was extremely ill with a native disease of their homeland. Our technology was unable to do anything to help her. We were thankfully able to keep it from spreading, so no one else was harmed. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, each Sekirei is encoded with a number, hence Yugen-san being dubbed number 66. In this game, the strongest of the Sekirei are the single digits, numbers 01 through 09. They are significantly stronger than the average Sekirei, and as such are much less likely to react to someone. If Yugen-san didn't mention it, many Sekirei do not react unless certain subconscious criteria are met. Particularly the first 9 need a certain level of strength to be met to even feel a twitch for a potential Ashikabi. Adahara paused to catch his breath and continued. You may be thinking, if these first 9 are so strong, then isn't the game relatively decided should they become bonded? That isn't necessarily the case. As you saw with Yugen-san, a type disadvantage can be a huge factor in a fight. Number 66 is a strong Sekirei, as is number 11, but lightning has a distinctive advantage over conductive materials. There are several classes of Sekirei within the plan who have marked amounts of power greater than others. The first is applicable to you. The double number class includes numbers 11, 22, 33, and so on. Of course 66 falls into this group, meaning number 66 is relatively stronger than the average Sekirei. Another group are the quarters, numbers 25, 50, 75, and 100. The current discipline squad of MBI are as well. You can think of them like the police force of the game. If rules are broken, these powerhouses rectify it. Numbers 105 and 106 are the members of this squad, led by number 04 herself. Supposedly there is one more group, though none of us researchers know anything about them. We've taken to calling them the Ghost Brigade. Scary, right? Oh, and watch out for number 47. For some reason, she's abnormally powerful. An anomaly, if you will. Now it may seem unfair to the Sekirei who don't have boost like the others, but such is the way of things. Life isn't equal, and it never will be. And it's not like they don't have a chance, it will just be much harder. For example, if an Ashikabi has a single digit and a regular Sekirei, that could very well keep them activated. Are you following so far? Give me a couple seconds to process this information. Of course. Take all the time you need, Naruto-san. This was a lot to process. Not that it was difficult to process, but the knowledge was going to take a moment to digest. This game isn't going to be straightforward with all these factors, but I hadn't expected it to be. It's comforting to know that Yugen is among the stronger Sekirei, even if it is as Kadahara said. I expect Yugen will know some things Kadahara may not, so I'll wait to decide what's next until then. Alright Kadahara-san, I'm ready. Please, call me Shisei, Naruto-san. I've never been much for formalities. The next topic pertains to you directly. The role of Ashikabi. Ashikabi themselves are prohibited from fighting each other. The CEO felt that the physical weakness or incapability of an individual should not be what decides theirs or their Sekirei's fate. On the other hand, Sekirei are allowed to attack an Ashikabi. He sees this as fair because it is a Sekirei's duty to protect their Ashikabi, so should they fail that job, they might as well be removed from the plan. The only limit is that they are not allowed to kill an Ashikabi, or another Sekirei for that matter. The CEO would rather no lives were lost during this game. Due to the level of technology in MBI's possession, anything short of instantaneous death is recoverable, so this limitation is more of a failsafe than anything. Naruto made note that he had not banned an Ashikabi fighting a Sekirei. It was likely because they felt an Ashikabi could not manage to fight a Sekirei, which was true for most. Naruto was not most. Though he had no intentions of fighting himself, should it become necessary, he may intervene. Shisei continued unabated by Naruto's ponderings. There are 2 more systems that have been put into place for the game. The Ally system and the Avenger system. The first, the Ally system, is a sort of team bonding of Ashikabi under a mutual banner. This ability can only be initiated by 2 Ashikabi in a pure state of mind for the purpose of cutting down Ashikabi extortion. When two or more Ashikabi ally together, it creates an artificial secondary bond that functions similarly to the bond between a Sekirei and an Ashikabi. Truthfully, it simply allows the allies to note the relative location and the general state of the partner, making it a glorified alert system should one enter into combat. The interesting part about this pact is that allies may not attack each other, lest they incur a severe penalty. The Avenger system activates when one of an ally's Sekirei is eliminated. The power of the defeated is distributed between both parties' Sekirei. Without an ally pact, a defeated Sekirei's remaining core energy will still be distributed to any other Sekirei owned by the same Ashikabi, meaning their Ashikabi will receive more power overall than the ally system, but it does not come with the perks that the other has. Still with me, Naruto-san? I'm going to need another second, Shisei-san. Of course. Naruto thought for a moment before realizing that his prior thoughts had left him with a large question. Shisei-san, are there any Ashikabi in particular I should look out for? And do you know where the highest concentration of Sekirei activity within the city is? While he couldn't see him through the phone, Naruto could feel Shisei nod in affirmation. Indeed there are, Naruto-san. In fact, there are several. 3 major Ashikabi have started to emerge in different quadrants of the city. Izumi Higa, the owner of Higa Pharmaceuticals, has begun to establish dominance in the east, starting with Ginza in the Chuo Ward. Hayato Mikagami, first son of the prestigious Mikagami family, established an early lead with a winging of number 05. He has taken the area south of his home in Aoyama within the Minato Ward. The last one to watch out for is a man named Kakuro. Avoid him at all costs if you can. They say he isn't completely human, and the last person to meet him was admitted to a hospital owned by MBI with severe mental deterioration. The sheer terror on the man's face was horrifying. Naruto could just about hear the shudder and feel Shisei get goosebumps just from speaking the last one's name, Kakuro. He might have to meet this man. Once he was ready, of course. Note: this story takes place earlier on in the game, and many canon events have not been established. The one you may have noticed is that I did not mention Sanada. I have it that he hasn't risen as the Ashikabi of the West yet. The area with the highest level of activity is the southwest region of Tokyo, mainly in the Setagaya and Meguro wards. Many Sekirei when released tend to just travel in the direction that headquarters entrance leads to, which is southwest. If I didn't specify, MBI headquarters are in the Minato ward, specifically in Shiodome. The other areas of the city have a spreading of activity. The exception is the north in the Arakawa ward. They say a scary Hanya lives there, and no one bothers to disturb that area. The CEO has also expressly told fights to be kept out of that ward, for whatever reason. Damn it. Naruto's apartment was in the middle of one of the larger residential districts on the edge of the Setagaya ward, bordering Meguro. He had the worst damn luck ever. Though the tidbit about the north intrigued him. If he could move there, he wouldn't have to be active in the game much. 2 birds with 1 stone. He also couldn't help but find it ironic that the heart of this game was located in a ward after his father's namesake. I see. Thank you, Shisei-san, for enlightening me. You're more than welcome, Naruto-san. I can't think of anything else I need to tell you, so are there any more questions I can answer for you? Naruto thought for a second, ultimately drawing a blank. No, I think that's all. Thank you for your time. No problem. If you have any more questions, feel free to call me back at this number. As a researcher, I don't have much of a social life, so it would be nice to chat sometime. You strike me as a like-minded individual, Naruto-san. That would be great. Have a good rest of your day. With a soft snap, Naruto closed the flyphone and stowed it back in his pocket. Naruto closed his eyes and began massaging his temples, already feeling a headache coming on. Opening the balcony door, Naruto made his way quietly through the bedroom and into the living room to his favorite couch, sitting down with a loud oof. He sat there for almost 5 minutes processing everything in the conversation and then picked up a book from the table. It would be several hours at the minimum before Yugen woke up, so he would be doing a lot of reading to make his already aching headache even worse. Yugen's eyes shot open and flickered between her surroundings, wary of any danger that may be present. I know this ceiling, she mumbled. And I'm back in these damn bandages. So she had been knocked out fighting a lightning wielder again. The last thing she could remember was impaling Hikaki with her iron rods, and then everything was black. If she was back in Naruto's house, then he was safe and they had escaped. Wouldn't it be amusing if Homura had jumped in again? If she knew one thing about the flame user, it was that he was resolute in his duty as a guardian. Shaking her head lightly, she refocused on the present. This time, the first thing she did was look to the bedside table for food. The great Yugen wouldn't make the same mistake twice, haha. Sure enough, Naruto had left her something to eat. It wasn't anything spectacular, but in her state that was for the best. The meal was a simple stew of pureed meat and vegetables to make for easy edibility, and a soft hunk of bread. As always, Naruto's cooking smelled wonderful. Next to the plate sat a cup of water and a scrap of paper, a note if she was seeing correctly. The little note beside the table read, "Be sure to eat this when you wake up. Your body needs to replace its lost nutrients. Once you're done eating, get some more rest. The richness of the food will likely put you to sleep anyways. I'll be in the living room. Rest well, Naruto." Yugen couldn't help but smile at his words. Naruto truly is a thoughtful man. Maybe being winged isn't going to be so bad after all. Eating his words, Yugen quickly ate the delicious meal and fell back asleep. With a defeated sigh, Naruto closed his book. He hadn't been able to keep his mind off of the thoughts that raced through it. Thoughts of the Sekirei plan and the Sekirei within, the other Ashikabi, his own part in the scheme, and his bond with Yugen. He was an official part of this game, whether he liked it or not. A bittersweet smile reached his face. There went his peaceful and dull life. On the other hand, he certainly wasn't going to be bored again. He condescendingly laughed at himself. Heh, when was the last time I had human company? I can't even remember anymore. I've become a mockery of everything I once stood for. Everyone must be turning in their graves at the sad sight I've become. Can I really be blamed though? My days as Naruto Uzumaki were so long ago that I don't even know how much time has passed. The only constants have been time itself, nature, and me. His eyes clouded over as he spoke, drawn in once more by the ghosts of his past. When the Fourth Great Shinobi War had ended, Naruto had been one of the only shinobi left standing. The survivors had gathered together under one village. The village hidden in the past, Kakagakure no Sado. Naruto had been anointed the Shaddai Mirakage. Or rather, the first future shadow. He had been the only Mirakage. Those days were of a terse peace and somber reality that never faded until the shinobi finally died away, leaving him the lone survivor to wander for all eternity. Naruto snapped back into reality with a shake of his head. He had long since given up his right to be Naruto Uzumaki. Or rather, he cursed that name with his very existence. The Uzumaki name and his status as a Jinchuriki were what put him in this wretched state. His Uzumaki longevity had melded with that of Kurama's in a last-ditch attempt to survive his final battle with Madara, making him a false immortal. It had not only multiplied his lifespan infinitely, but Kurama's chakra had also made his healing factor so powerful that only an instantaneous fatality could kill him. He knew from experience. Despite the pain and suffering it caused him, he couldn't take his own life. At least, not without passing on the legacy of the shinobi to someone worthy. Someone he had yet to meet. When he finally did, he could die in peace. He could reunite with all his friends in heaven and finally not be alone. I suppose I'm not really alone anymore, am I? He reiterized. No, Yugen's here with me now. Well, for a handful of years, anyways. Of course, she would eventually succumb to the sands of time, as all others did, and he would be alone once again. Fear slowly gripped his heart as he imagined losing another person close to him would be able to no. Stop thinking that way. There's no need to stress over things that are far in the distant future. Spend too much time looking to the future or the past and you'll always miss the present. Ironic, considering who he used to be at the end of the shinobi world. Odds, he needed a drink. The soft scratching of a pen on paper echoed through the apartment, perhaps making the atmosphere even more quiet paradoxically. The sun had gone down an hour or so prior, and the whitewater sound of people on their way home from work and or on their way to hang out with friends at the bar or the like seeped in through the windows. The flowing writing would halt every so often and be replaced with the clinking of a whiskey glass. Naruto let out a hearty sigh as the alcohol burned its way down his throat and warmed his insides. When all else failed, a good drink could ease his tension. The sound of padding feet interrupted his musings. Several seconds later, a limping Yugen entered the room. Naruto gave her a soft smile. It's good to see you up and about. How are you feeling? Yugen made her way around the couch and sat beside him. Naruto took note of where she sat. Not too far away, but not right up against him either. It was a good sign that the bond hadn't turned her into a mushy love machine. The forced grin swept her face. I'm feeling about as well as a shock therapy victim could be. I'm not in as bad shape as the time you found me, so there is that. She dramatically groaned, but what I really want is to get back into some normal clothes. These bandages are killing me. Staring at her incredulously, Naruto snorted at her drama. You walk around like you stepped out of medieval Europe with steel armor on the regular, and you talk about a little tape being bad. I didn't realize you were so off the beaten path, Yugen. She pouted at him cutely with a huff. Hey, you get used to wearing it after a while, and the protection it provides makes it worth it. Besides, steel plates don't chafe. Let's see you get wrapped up and not go stir crazy. I don't have to wear them because I don't get turned into fried chicken every couple of days. You reap what you sow, as they say, he said with a half smirk. She growled at him lightly. Hey. It's not my fault that lightning is such a bitch to deal with. I couldn't use my armor or any close quarters weapons against that unless I really did want to look like a three-piece chicken bucket. That was the worst matchup I could have been in as a metal wielder. I know, dear. I was only teasing. I'm well aware of the disadvantage you were facing and that it wouldn't have been nearly the same against a lower-class Sekirei, seeing as you're a double number. Blinking in momentary shock, Yugen asked the first thing that came to mind. How did you know that? I received a call from an MBI researcher named Shisei Kadahara while you were unconscious. Hiroto Minaka asked him to fill me in on some need-to-know Ashikabi business. I have several questions that I still would like answered, but I figured it would be better to ask them of a Sekirei. Yugen nodded. What would you like to know? Finally able to put the raging thoughts in his mind to rest, Naruto gave her a small smile. The first thing I would like to know is if you know how many Sekirei there are. Thinking for a moment, Yugen frowned. I'm not actually sure. Neither the researchers or we Sekirei know that for sure. Most researchers personally dealt with specific Sekirei, so they weren't made aware about much concerning the others, and since all Sekirei were housed individually, we rarely spent time with others of our kind. That was certainly interesting and strange. Naruto couldn't help but feel that Minaka had a very big reason for keeping everyone in the dark. I see. Thank you. My second question. Are the Sekirei released by numerical order or is it a randomly generated release? And beyond the set classes, does a lower number represent a stronger Sekirei? Yugen's mouth curved upward slightly. This time she did have an answer to his question. It's neither. In the lab, we had what was called a Sekirei exit test. To be allowed to enter the city, each Sekirei has to pass a series of diagnostics determining them fit to join the plan. It actually evens the game out quite well, since all of the most powerful Sekirei aren't released at once. In fact, many of the low-numbered Sekirei were modified a bit, resulting in a lot of unexpected changes. Number 07 is still being held within the labs because of an accidental premature winging while testing, and from what I managed to overhear from the adjusters, number 06 is a bit more fluid in some ways than others. There are more cases than those, to my knowledge. Concerning your other question, a lower number does tend to have a stronger level of power, mainly because more experimentation was done with the first numbers. It doesn't necessarily mean the higher numbers can't win, though. Nodding his head, Naruto carried on. Last question. What would you say to moving to the north of Tokyo? Shisei-san told me that the activity in the north is practically non-existent and seeing as we live in the hotspot for Sekirei combat, moving would likely aid us in non-participation. The grin split Yugen's face. That sounds perfect. The less involved in this game we are, the better. How soon can we move? Now that's a good question. We still have some things to take care of before we can consider moving out, so depending on how fast we can take care of things, it shouldn't be long. In the meantime, we can go touring for places. We'll definitely need to get you some normal clothes, seeing as we got interrupted last time. You're going to have to suffer through the lingerie lady again since all your clothes got burnt. My superpowers tell me that we won't have a lot of success finding a place if you walk up looking like suspicious. Knight of the cross-dressing table. Yugen burst out laughing. Oh, that was good. I don't think that I can even be bothered, that we have to go see that crazy lady again, Naruto quirked an eyebrow, or that you'll have to go bando commando again. Her snickering ended instantly. Shut up. It was Naruto's turn to snicker. Blood violently sprayed the walls, painting them crimson as gravity brought the life liquid down like waterfalls. It pooled across the ground, spreading further and further to swallow up all that was pure. It was everywhere. Bodies lay strewn across the earth, unmoving. A crow landed on one of the bodies and began pecking at the unresistant flesh. Whatever atrocity had occurred here would be remembered by the survivors for years to come. We really need to get you your own clothes before you kill the entire male population. I am not bailing you out when you get charged with mass murder. Naruto sweat dropped at the many unconscious men lining the sidewalks. A couple of them had shot back from a nosebleed so hard that they had cracked the concrete walls of the buildings behind them. Oh, you're such a dear. I love you too, sweetie. We're out clothes shopping, so it's not in any part negligence. If all these other men really were knocked out by my state of dress, why are you unfazed, nah? Am I not attractive to you? Yugen teased. Naruto froze wide-eyed. She had actually gotten him for once. AI shit. I'm fucked. She caught me in a timeless widow's trap. Naruto coughed into his fist, ahem, it's nothing like that. I just have a lot more self-control than most men. I'm not a normal human, remember? I do think you're beautiful, I'm just not going to bleed out over it. I wouldn't have made it this long with you living in my apartment if that was the case. Yugen rested a hand on her rosy cheek and smiled. Well, I suppose that's true. I got you to compliment me though, so I win. Naruto blinked. I hadn't realized it was a competition. And is that why you're wearing one of my old beater shirts that barely fits me anymore? Yugen only smiled wider in response. But of course, it's simply a part of our back and forth banter. She chose not to answer his question purposefully, it was more amusing that way. Naruto remained silent with a small smile on his face. This was, dare he say it, fun. She had made his life somewhat fun. In the beginning, he had only been looking to knock off some boredom, and Yugen had actually made his life pleasant. His blue orbs locked with her gold ones. Until now, he had been unsure, but he could say it clearly now. He was glad he decided to investigate that night. The jangling of keys and the click of a lock meant that Naruto and Yugen's trip had come to an end. Opening the door, Naruto walked in with several bags in his hands and headed to the bedroom, Yugen trailing behind him. As he crossed into the threshold, Naruto set the bags down in front of the large dresser on the far wall of his room. There. I'll leave putting things away to you. Yugen thanked him and immediately set about the task of putting her new clothes away. The matter of rooming arrangements hadn't been a problem for almost half of the time she had been living there since she had been unconscious and injured. Making a path to his usual spot, Naruto absent-mindedly thought through the day's events. While getting Yugen new clothes had been successful, very much so, since the owner of La Creme had made quick work of providing Yugen new clothing, finding a new residence had not been met with as much fortune. Since Naruto's occupation was a writer under a pen name, he officially did not have a job. Many places had wanted information that he couldn't reveal or simply didn't have and had turned them away as a result. Naruto lamented on times before the modern era. It had been easy to blend in all these years because as long as he didn't stay in any given village or city for too long, he could just wait until anyone who may recognize him died and then come back. What with the recent inventions of identification cards, security streaming, and other such technology, he couldn't hide like the old days. Appearing to be a normal human was a bitch. Though there were two interesting things that had happened during the course of the day. The first was Yugen getting a job, the second was a chance meeting Naruto had had. Flashback to shopping at La Creme. I'm glad you came back to visit us, it makes me very happy to know you like our selections this much. The owner gushed. Yugen's sweat dropped and chuckled nervously. Yeah. I liked what I bought here last time, and you were just so kind and generous that I decided this would be my exclusive spot for underwear. She conveniently forgot to mention that all her previous purchases had been burned to a crisp. No need to bring that up. I'm glad, dear. Oh. So I talked with a friend of mine who owns a modeling agency and told her about you. She said she would be happy to have you come by and audition. Here's her number. She told me to tell you to just call anytime. The middle-aged woman handed Yugen a torn-off strip of paper with a number scrawled on it. Her name is Lily, hers is one of the best agencies around. Real looker too. Be careful or she might steal your man, haha. Yugen grunted non-amusedly at that last comment, something the aged store owner noticed. Oh, I'm just teasing, dear. She's not like that, I promise. I'd be more worried about that crowd out there stealing him first. She pointed out the window to where a flustered Naruto was standing surrounded a little too closely by several frowning women. She sighed and sauntered out the door to save her partner from his predicament. Flashback end. Yugen had called Lily between stops and set up an audition date. Surprisingly, they had gotten along swimmingly just off of that first call. They would hopefully have moved into a new place by the time of the interview. The second encounter had been a little more personal to him and more on the strange side. Flashback just before the first flashback lol. Flashbackception. Yugen held the door handle to La Creme before turning to face Naruto. It was probably to buy herself time as much as it was to tell him. It was hard to ignore the store owner bouncing around like a dog waiting for its alpha to come home inside the establishment. I'll be out in a few minutes. Just wait for me here. Naruto leaned back on his hip and scratched the back of his head, sure. I'll probably take a quick lap around the block and be back before you're done. She nodded her head and opened the door to the shop. At his word, Naruto set off to wander the area. Taking a deep breath in, Naruto exhaled and wrinkled his nose. If there was anything he hated about cities, it was the smell and the lack of nature. The pungent smell of oil, dust, and pollution contaminated the air. For a sage like himself, this was just about the worst. Rounding a corner, Naruto smacked headlong into someone. Cultivated reflexes kicked in, and he caught the person by the arm, yanking them towards him to keep them from falling. He exhaled sharply when the person smacked right into his chest. It was definitely a woman, he could feel a soft pair of large breasts pressed up against his chest. Hiding down the slight blush that wanted to creep onto his face, in that moment he was hard-pressed not to react in a normal male fashion. Looking down at who he had bumped into, he was caught off guard when his eyes fell upon an absolute beauty. She had beautiful silver tresses done up into a ponytail that cascaded down her back. Her bangs fell between her eyes and framed her face perfectly, flaring out slightly at the tips on either side of her face in a way that made her look even more pretty. A long strand of silver hung from the crown of her head like what was it called, a hogue. Yes, that sounded right. Odds, he was entranced and he hadn't even made it past her face. Sharp, tired-looking hazel eyes stared back up at him and he shuddered slightly at the tingles it sent through his body. Thin eyebrows, a small cute nose, a slight twinge of a smile, alabaster skin, and a sharp jawline gave off a sexy appeal. His eyes trailed down her body quickly so as to not be caught staring. The woman had a slender, lithe frame that held an athletic build he knew was designed for speed. Her sizable bust, curvy hips, tight ass, and mile-long legs only furthered her incredible appeal. She wore a tight black leather top, a black miniskirt, black stockings, and black heels, topped with a grey haori. He decided that the outfit took her appeal from drop-dead gorgeous to fallen angel. He liked black. He really liked black. This woman had to be the most beautiful he had ever seen. A slight twinge passed over him when he thought about Yugen, but she was extremely beautiful too. Perhaps what stood out the most though was how she held herself. It took him less than a second to tell she was a warrior, born and bred. Naruto took a step back and scratched his head. "Ah, I'm sorry miss. I wasn't paying enough attention to where I was going. Are you alright?" Just as he had studied her, she had been studying him. There was something off about him. He didn't feel like any of the other pathetic trash that made up the human species. Maybe he was just trash, not pathetic trash. Humans were all disgusting creatures, after all. "There's no problem. You stopped me from falling, so we'll call it even." Naruto nodded. "That sounds fine. Take care miss." He started to walk back towards the shop, but was stopped. "Wait a second. What's your name?" the woman called. Naruto turned to look back at her over his shoulder. It's not polite to ask for someone's name before giving your own. The woman's eyes narrowed dangerously for a second before she closed them and gave him an eye smile that reminded him of himself back when he was young. Nostalgia. "It's Karasuba. Now what is your name?" Karasuba's voice was edged with steel, despite the easygoing look on her face. Naruto's eyes never left her, watching her very closely. He paused. "Naruto. Namikaze Naruto. A pleasure to meet you, Karasuba-san." She smiled and nodded at him. "Likewise, Naruto-san. Have a good day." "You as well." Turning around, he left. Karasuba stared at his retreating form curiously. That man had caught her interest. Not only had she not felt him coming around the corner, but he had also been quick enough to catch her before she herself reacted. Oh yes, he was a fighter, of that she was sure. If she had had her sword on her, she might have been tempted to fight him right here and now. And that look in his eyes, she loved that cold dead look. That look that had seen much and become jaded with everything. That hated everything as much as she did. A malicious smirk crossed her face and her pupils sharpened. "I look forward to crossing blades, Naruto-san." He looked a lot like the man she had seen fighting in the alley yesterday. Flashback end. And Kami, those eyes. How he loved those eyes. Maybe it was because he felt a sort of kinship in that look. Naruto grimaced. His whole line of thought then and now was too close to cheating for his comfort, even if it was just him appreciating the female form. While he and Yugen may not be dating, the bond was extremely close, if not stronger than a romantic relationship. His thoughts were his thoughts, and he wouldn't act on them, which was what truly mattered. That didn't assuage the pang of guilt he felt in his heart though. He decided that maybe doing something nice for Yugen would make up for it. "Yugen, could you come here for a second?" He heard an affirmative yeah from the bedroom, followed by the sound of footsteps. Yugen walked up behind him and leaned over the couch to look him in the eye, which had the added effect of pillowing Naruto between her generous mounds. Oh, this was good. What made it even better was that it didn't look like she had done it on purpose, she had simply acted normally. Accidental service for the win. Sit down for a second," he queried. She raised an eyebrow at his out-of-the-ordinary request, but shrugged and complied. "What's up?" she said as she sat down on the couch. Rather than deign her with an answer, Naruto made another request. "Turn your back towards me." Once again complying with his strange series of requests, she shifted on the couch, pulling her legs up underneath her. What's he up to? Is this supposed to be some sort of surprise? I wonder if it could be. Her guessing was cut off as she felt his fingers begin to dig themselves into the muscles of her shoulders, slowly massaging the tissue and releasing the tension within. "Ah, that feels good. A little lower." "Ah. That's the spot." Yugen could feel the tightness in her muscles slowly ebb away as he continued to apply a light but deep pressure. "So what's the occasion?" she asked between moans of contentment. Naruto began shifting his hands lower to include her upper back, slowly tracing circles across her back as his fingers danced. "Nothing special. I figured you could use a good massage after all the time you've had to spend immobile. I could see the tension in your body. It's way too tight in the shoulder area." Thanks. I've been feeling really stiff, so this is perfect. My back is always so sore and I can never. A little to the right please. Little more. Down a little. That's it. You're really good at this." she commented as he started using his palms to loosen the surface tissue. Never mind that the words and noises coming from her could sound really provocative out of context. Bunch of perverts. Not like I'm the one writing this or anything. I plead the fifth. I figured. It's my understanding that gifted women tend to all have back pain. This is the least I can do to thank you, he said as he loosened a knot just below her right shoulder blade. What are you, thanking me for? Her words were interrupted every so often by groans of satisfaction. She could feel her muscles unknotting and loosening it up, and it felt wonderful. She could get addicted to this. Naruto began slowly applying more pressure to his ministrations, as well as subtly sneaking wisps of chakra from his fingertips to aid his endeavor. Back in his day, the Haika massage clinic had been a popular stop in Konoha, well known throughout the nations. One trip and you were hooked. Needless to say they were filthy rich. He may or may not have stole a hem, copied their technique. His first sensei would be proud. The Uchiha clan had tried once, but that had resulted in a long feud. On Yugen's side, it felt like a small wave of heat was coursing through her body, which she attributed to the muscles loosening, almost as if they were celebrating their freedom. For being here with me. I haven't been bored for a second since you got here. Though I'm hesitant to say it, I've actually enjoyed myself. Thank you for fighting to protect me. For putting yourself at risk simply for my sake. You deserve so much better than anything I could give you. And even though it wasn't what I had been expecting when I rescued you, thank you for choosing me. Yugen sat there wide-eyed, too shocked to even pay attention to the pleasure of the massage. His words had seriously caught her off guard. From what she knew of Naruto, he didn't open up easily. It was understandable. She could tell he had had a very painful life which still scarred him to this day. He was haunted by his past and was hesitant to be around people. So for him to speak to her like this, so genuinely, was touching. Yugen smiled a true smile. She really had found a wonderful ashikabi. Yugen turned to face Naruto, forcing him to stop his massage. Without warning, she pulled him into a hug, wrapping her arms tightly around him. Naruto sat ramrod straight, paralyzed at the sudden contact, before his eyes softened and he relaxed into the hug, hugging her back with equal fervor. Resting her chin in the crook of her neck, Yugen spoke softly with a voice like air. It's been my absolute pleasure, Naruto-sama. As your Sekirei, it is my duty, but more than that, I do all of those things because I want to. I never wanted to be with anyone, but you broke the iron shell around my heart, something which I'll be forever grateful to you for. I know we tease each other and give each other a hard time, but I cherish every second I have with you. You're a kind, thoughtful, and wonderful man, Naruto-sama. I know we've only known each other for a week and a half, and I may not be the most expressive Sekirei, but I'll say this now and as many times in the future as you need to hear it. I love you, Naruto. I'm so glad you're my ashikabi. Her eyes glistened as she spoke, filled with utter emotion. Wet trails flowed down her neck. She pulled back to look at Naruto. His eyes were shut tightly, and his jaw was clenched as he quietly wept salty tears. She could feel all the pain, hurt, loneliness, guilt, and sorrow pouring off of him and through their bond, and tears began leaking from Yugen's eyes. What he must have gone through to be this devastated had to be nothing short of horrible. Yugen traced the whisker marks on his cheek softly. It will be alright, Naruto-sama. I'm here. I'm here. She slowly pulled him into a soul-searing kiss, gray wings exploding from her back as energy saturated the air, giving off an ethereal glow. Several seconds went by, but they showed no signs of stopping. Almost a minute passed, and they were only stopped by the need for air. Pulling away from him, Yugen smiled. And don't say that about yourself, Naruto-sama. Even if you had nothing to give me, I would still be happy. Because it's you. I wouldn't have it any other way. Number 66, Yugen, will always be at your service. Naruto stared at her in silence. This girl is truly something else. What the hell does she see in someone like me? Someone who failed so utterly at everything he ever stood for. Who left everyone he cared about to rot and disgusted even the Shinigami so much that he turned him away. Who cares if you've hit rock bottom? When you've lost everything, the only place to go is up. He smiled self-depreciatingly. He had been the one to say those words all those years ago. Is that the bond speaking, or Yugen? Yugen beamed at him and simply said, Yugen. Thank you. They sat there in silence for almost 15 minutes until Naruto decided that it was time to break up the scene, finally having regained his composure. Standing up and cracking his back, Naruto turned towards the still-seated Yugen. Coughing into his fist, Naruto muttered, you saw nothing. The wolfish grin split Yugen's face. Of course not, Naruto-sama. I definitely won't be using this as blackmail for later. Naruto's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? Grumbling about troublesome women taking advantage of men when they were vulnerable, Naruto changed the subject. He was getting hungry and neither of them had eaten since breakfast that morning. I'm going to go cook us dinner. Any requests? She stared into space as she thought, anything Western sounds good. Every day was traditional Japanese back at the lab. Naruto nodded his head, alright. I think I have just the thing in mind. When Naruto turned to leave, Yugen threw out one last comment as an afterthought. Don't expect me to be going all soft like that again, okay? It's not my thing. Shaking his head, Naruto simply replied, yes, dear. Over his shoulder. Entering the kitchen, he washed his hands and tied on his favorite and only, but who cares? Orange and black apron and immediately set about finding all the pots, pans, utensils, and other materials he would need for this dish. He was going to make a pub-style chicken pot pie. And now it's time for cooking time with Reaper. Full of fun facts about culinary arts. The chicken pot pie was a dish created in America in 1796. The original publication called for many different kinds of meat, such as chicken, which was what he was going to make beef, and other such meats. There was even a sea pot pie, which ironically had nothing from the sea in it. Comprised of veal, mutton, pigeon, turkey, and other game, it was a meal designed for sailors on the high seas. The dish gained its popularity throughout America in the 19th century, in the form of a robin pot pie. As to be expected with America being a newer country, the pot pie did not originate from there. It was in fact a Grecian dish called artokrias. He should know. He was there. It was created a number of centuries ago, he couldn't recall exactly when. It was hard to remember that far back. He was old, damn it. Naruto froze with his hand on the fridge as an odd thing struck him. Now that he thought about it, it was ironic that despite the common misconception that he was American or a foreigner, he had never actually been to America. He knew a lot about it via publication and such, but he had never seen it in person. Maybe that was something he would do sometime soon. He was sure Yugen would enjoy traveling since she had always been caged up in MBI's facilities. Opening the fridge, Naruto rooted around for the necessary ingredients. He was going to need chicken, onions, butter, chicken broth, and carrots. He didn't have peas, so he decided a substitute of edamame would be fine. For the most part, none of these ingredients were common of a Japanese kitchen, but Naruto had visited so many places and experienced so many things over the years that his kitchen was never purely of one affiliation. Walking to his pantry, he pulled out a bag of pie crusts and a bag of flour. Good, he had everything so far. The only other things he would need were the spices, and he would get them out as necessary. Naruto called across the apartment just as he was about to start to where his other occupant watched him lazily. Yugen, would you like to help? The dazed look snapped off her face in an instant as she processed his words. She smiled and nodded, sounds good. Naruto winced slightly at the look on her face. He may not be the best at reading people, but he was pretty damn good. To the uninformed observer, Yugen's face held the same semi-haughty, semi-amused look as always, but he could see the undertone of it. That slight upwards twitch of her lower face said it all. It was the I'm glad you're feeling better face. That wouldn't be bad in most cases, but for Naruto it was. He felt a little alarmed in the first place that she had gotten him to open up like that, and a majority afraid. He had always been a people person when he was young, his precious people had been his life. When they had died one by one throughout the Great War, it had hit him hard every single time. He mourned them all like there was no tomorrow. And so to this day he avoided any intimate contact with people. It was a destructive paradox, a man who hurts harshly by being alone, but ultimately will be forced to live through the pain of watching them leave because he cannot join them if he isn't. That was Naruto Namikaze, a maelstrom of hell and suffering, unable to and unsure of what to do with himself. You would think that after all these years, he would have become some sort of omnipotent sage who knew all of life's secrets, but he would call anyone who said that foolish. With more time came more questions and fewer answers. In fact, he knew less about how to interact with people now than an average person. No, he was still as clueless about the way of things as anyone else. Deep in the depths of his heart, so deep that he didn't acknowledge its existence, Naruto was terrified. Of her. Terrified to let someone in and then be forced to watch them slowly die, helpless. He loathed being helpless. Yugen waved a hand in front of his face, snapping him out of his dread. Naruto. Are you alright? My, if just looking at me has you spaced out like this, I'm worried for your future. Despite his prior turmoil, Naruto didn't miss a beat. Actually, I was admiring that lovely wall over there. Haven't you ever heard of a wall-eyed stare? I mean, look at it. That wonderful, bland shade of white, with absolutely no defining features whatsoever. It's marvelous. She turned to look at the wall and nodded in approval. Yes, it's quite the nice wall. Dull and boring. Just like you. No wonder you like it so much. Naruto fell to his knees dramatically and cast his hands to the sky. I can never escape boredom-chan. She never leaves. Like a clingy girlfriend. Or Yugen. She's pretty clingy too. He turned his head to the side and hid his mouth behind his hand. I kept the receipt. I'm gonna return her for a full refund. She stomped her foot and growled lowly, "I heard that." Blinking innocently back at her, Naruto pouted. "First you call me names and then you accuse me of things I didn't do. It's not my fault that I'm so dull and boring. Life is just so wonderful that my pitiful self could never compare to the joy and radiance that is nature." His voice went flat, "Yeah, even I don't believe myself with that one." Recalibrating himself, Naruto untied the apron from his waist and handed it to Yugen. "Here, this is the only one I've got. You'll need this more than me. Go ahead and wash your hands and we'll get started." A smirk split her face, and in an instant Naruto knew she was going to throw some smart quip at him to try and get him off balance. "Joke's on you, he didn't used to be called the king of pranks for nothing." "I see, so you called me in here to fill that naked apron fantasy most men have. How sinful, Naruto-kun. Time to get her back." Naruto walked up and pulled her into a hug, whispering in her ear lightly in a way that sent shivers through her body. He began running his fingers up and down her body, tracing the smooth skin. "And what if I was?" Her reaction was priceless. A blush sprung to her face, and her mouth tried to form words, only to fail in silence. Wide eyes and fidgeting hands completed the look perfectly. "You perverted idiot. I'm not going to do something like that," she sputtered out. Naruto snickered to himself. One moment she could be acting sultry and the next she could be adorably flustered. She wasn't so tough when she was on the receiving end. Ma, I was just kidding. You wouldn't happen to be embarrassed by the thought, nah?" "Oh, of course not. I just don't feel like doing it. Don't get the two mixed up." Oh yeah, she was at tsundere. Not an obvious tsundere, it was only slight and didn't show up under most circumstances, but given the right prompt she went totally tsun. Naruto feigned drama, how could I have been so mistaken? I apologize for my ignorance. Now, if the lady would please wash her hands and put the apron on over her clothes, we can start. Spinning around so fast he thought she might have gotten whiplash, Yugen began putting her apron on and rinsed her hands clean. Once she was done, Yugen stared at him expectantly. "Alright, what's next?" Naruto, who was working on mixing the flour, onion, and some spices in with melted butter, pointed at a small cutting board with an assortment of vegetables on top. "I don't think I need to question whether you know your way around a blade," he said more as a statement than anything. "I may know a thing or two about knives," she said as a strip of metal hidden underneath the sleeve of her shirt molded into a knife. "This is nothing." She began chopping the vegetables with expert precision, something Naruto could appreciate. Turning back to his own task, he stirred in chicken broth and milk, lightening the ingredients and turning them into a creamy soup as he toiled away at it. It wasn't much longer before Yugen had finished her task. Naruto added in her contribution to the pot, the stew looking more and more appetizing. The soft ding alerted Naruto to the oven being properly heated and at the perfect time, too. Taking the tray he had placed the pie crusts on and filling each with the stew, he covered each of the crusts with a top and popped them into the oven. Now all they had to do was wait and clean up. "We're all done. I'll clean up in here. Feel free to sit down and wait." "Thanks for your help, it saved us some time until food is ready," Naruto said. Yugen began taking dishes to the sink and washing them. Steam poured from the air as the hot water fell from the faucet, obscuring her face slightly amidst the mist. "I'll help clean. You made dinner, so I'll clean. I'm not a guest here anymore, you know." Naruto hummed at that. He supposed she wasn't, she was living here with him. That was still a strange thought. It was novel. He still hadn't completely decided if he liked it or not. Yugen herself certainly kept things interesting for him. "I suppose you aren't. I'm still getting used to that, honestly." "Living with me?" she questioned. He shook his head. "Living with someone in general. Like I told you when we first met, I've lived alone my entire life. Even when I never mind. Anyways, I've always been a bit of a hermit, so it's strange having someone so close to me. At least since the days of the elemental nations." He added mentally. Yugen grunted thoughtfully. It made sense, after all. She was the same way, seeing as each Sekirei had been housed separately from the day they awoke. Even when tests and experiments were conducted, they weren't done en masse. "Well, I certainly hope you aren't disappointed. Being with me," she said as an afterthought. Naruto knew that line, it was another bit of a widow's trap. He had learned many of those from he shook his head. Focus on the present, focus on the present. Not at all. Like I told you earlier, I'm actually enjoying myself and I hope you are as well. With a beatific smile, Yugen simply said. "I am indeed." Naruto awoke the next morning blearily. He had never been much of a morning person and he doubted that would ever change. Smiling to himself groggily he recalled all the times his old sensei Jiraiya had woken him up at the crack of dawn with a bucket of ice water to the face. "Damn pervy sage." Naruto muttered affectionately. Slowly sitting up on the couch, he checked the time. If the clock on the wall was correct, it was 8:32 a.m. Groaning to himself, he flopped back down and buried his way back into the cushions. So early. Yep, definitely not a morning person. After several minutes passed, he sat back up with a heavy sigh. He needed to get up now or he never would. It took a supreme force of will to resist the heat of the blankets, calling him back to sleep. It took the blonde a moment to untangle himself from them, almost as if they were desperately trying to keep him from leaving. Waterfalls fell from his eyes as he finally extracted himself from his bed. "I'm sorry my love, but I shall return." He dramatized as he threw on a robe and left the living room, arm outstretched behind him longingly. Never let it be said Naruto wasn't a ham. Yawning widely, Naruto made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table doing his best to wake up. He could already feel himself steadily waking up with every sip. The miracles of coffee were boundless, and if ramen was the food of the gods, coffee was their drink. Besides liquor. Maybe he should say the non-hard drink of the gods. If he ever stopped being a writer, he would own a coffee shop. A fancy one. With every type of coffee imaginable. And he would go out and travel the world to gather the coffee himself, like the caffeine Dr. Dolittle. He could see it now, Mount Miyakakoa. He patted himself on the back for that one. He was just so damn good at puns. If he had a say, he was even better than Artix. The key to anyone who gets the reference. Mind process is finally somewhat operational. Naruto ran through his list of to-dos for the day. The biggest and most important was finding a place in the north to live. Seeing as they had gotten Yugen clothes yesterday and he had bought groceries just a couple of days ago, that was really the only thing they had to do for the day. Maybe having a full day to search and having ruled out some places would make the search easier. The sooner they got out and about, the better. The Cheshire grin grew on his face. Time to go wake up Yugen. Kakuzu had been right, time was money. Slipping into his bedroom quietly, he tiptoed up to the bedside where a sleeping Yugen lay unawares. She looked so cute he almost felt bad for what he was about to do. Keyword being almost. Taking a deep inhale, Naruto leaned over and shouted right into her ear, "Good morning San Diego. It is time for us to get up and enjoy the springtime of youth." Yosh. Thick fuzzy eyebrows grew on his face as he proclaimed his youth, disappearing almost as fast as they appeared. He had to pull his head back to avoid the steel dagger that almost impaled him. Yugen sat straight up breathing heavily as she tried to figure out what the hell was going on. Locking eyes with a snickering Naruto, she retracted her blade and put a hand on her breast in an attempt to slow her beating heart. She tugged a hand through her disheveled hair and glared daggers at him. "What the hell you son of a bitch? Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" He blinked innocently at her. "I heard waking up their partner in the morning is part of a couple's duty, so I thought I would give it a try. Did I get it right?" he said demurely. She didn't bother responding, instead grumbling about how she wished he hadn't dodged. Cracking her neck and stretching her arms above her head, which did wonderful things to her chest, Naruto noted, she extricated herself from the bed. Slipping off the side, she put a hand on the wall to steady herself as she gained her bearings. Naruto's arms, which had remained behind his back, came forward to reveal a piping hot coffee mug filled with the revival fluid. "I made you this if it makes you feel any better." Yugen smiled softly and shook her head, accepting the offering and immediately taking a sip. She closed her eyes as she felt the heat course through her, knocking the last dregs of sleep out of her. "Well, I suppose I could forgive you. Just this once." Her eyes bored a hole into him, "But don't try that again, or I won't miss next time." Naruto put his hands up in fake surrender and kept the stupid grin on his face. He knew from the look that she was more amused than upset and that she didn't really mean what she said. Yugen had a good nature. "Yes ma'am. Jokes aside, I woke you up because we need to get an early start today. We're going to hit the streets and continue our search for a place in northern Tokyo. We don't have anything else pressing to do today, so we'll have plenty of time to look. I'd like to be out of the house by 9:15 if at all possible." Poking her head out from the master bathroom, Yugen nodded with a toothbrush in her mouth. Plodding his way through the room, Naruto joined her in the bathroom. As both went through their routines at either sink, they truly did look like a married couple. When they finished freshening up and changed clothes, they sat down for a simple breakfast Naruto had made. It hadn't taken them more than 15 minutes to get ready, so they had a bit of padding to slow down and enjoy breakfast. Naruto sipped on his glass of orange juice absently, taking the time to eye Yugen's new apparel. While she looked really good in his clothing, she looked even better in actual women's clothes. Probably for different reasons, he thought. While he had remained true to his nature and worn a tight black compression shirt and extremely burnt auburn shorts, she went with a much more natural approach. Yugen wore a light gray long-sleeved shrug that reached just below her butt over top a white blouse that dipped at the neck to expose a generous amount of cleavage. A thin black leather belt with a silver buckle rested angular on her hip, fastening a pair of tight black skinny jeans in place that showed off her curves wonderfully. "Trying to upstage me with the outfit, huh? Practicing for the model part already?" he quipped in a light-hearted manner. Yugen finished chewing the piece of toast she had been eating and swallowed. So they were starting so soon into the morning, huh? Well, that's a bit out of left field. It's not like upstaging your choice of clothing is a particularly hard feat to do. Put clothing with any color on someone and they'd have your ratty look beat. Naruto winced, he had walked right into that one and he couldn't even complain. He'd been asking for that. He was going to chalk up that loss to not being completely awake yet. Yep, soundly accept his defeat and flee. Nah, who was he kidding? That was one part of him that had never died. And yet, you chose to be with this ratty, poor-tasted, moody, jerky, sad excuse for a human being of your own volition. What does that say about you, Yugen-chan? I don't know whether or not I should be annoyed or impressed that you always have some comeback for anything I say readily available. What can I say? It's a gift. You know you love me. She sighed in mild exasperation and chose not to give him the satisfaction of a response. That's enough for now. Let's finish eating and leave the banter for later. Naruto frowned ever so slightly. He hoped that he hadn't been too overbearing with his humor. Maybe he should tone it down going forward. Yeah, that was probably best. His frown flipped upside down as he stood up from the table. Right. Let's head out then. Naruto paused in the middle of the street to appraise another house. Giving it a thorough once-over and mulling it over for a minute, he shook his head and started walking again. Yugen watched him speculatively, too distracted by his actions to even look at the houses herself. He must have been looking for something in particular, seeing as he wasn't even taking the time to view the houses up close, let alone the interiors. Naruto, what are you looking for? You've passed by 10 houses already and it hasn't even been 5 minutes. Naruto looked away from the house he had been inspecting and saw the question written on his compatriot's face. Right, he hadn't even told her what he was searching for. Well, that was a breakdown of communication on his part. Seriously, had he gotten so bad at being around people that he forwent even talking to them? He scratched the back of his head. Sorry about that. I suppose I forgot to mention it. I've been looking for houses a bit more of the traditional style. While a modern house is fine and dandy, I'd like to be able to get away from all the hustle and bustle of the corporate status quo. The more natural, the better, I always say. You agree, right? Yugen hummed thoughtfully, mindlessly nodding along. She definitely agreed with that. She was never a fan of the urban jungle and its mechanical soul. Taking that as her answer, Naruto started walking down the road to the next house. Snapping from her thoughts, Yugen jogged to catch up to him. A few solid thuds could be heard and shortly after the sounds of sirens blared in the distance. Just as Yugen reached Naruto and opened her mouth to speak, they were interrupted rather viscerally. A loud roar like a bear assaulted their ears, making both whip their heads to the origin of the sound. A hulking mass of a man came running from an adjacent street with his fist beaked back, screaming at the top of his lungs. Yugen's eyes widened and she tensed, prepared to let her weapons loose at a second's notice. Just in case he wasn't after them, she didn't want to be too hasty. As he got closer, his target became apparent. He was charging straight at Naruto. Yugen threw her hand out in front of her, shouting at the blonde. Naruto, watch out. Her words fell on deaf ears as Naruto beat a fist back and charged straight at the hulking brute. The two collided with each other, punching the other squarely in the jaw, resulting in them both being pushed back several inches. Beeping their fists back, they launched another hook in unison. Yugen was starting to panic by this point. Shrapnel roiled around her as more shards of metal slipped out from under her sleeves. She needed to back him up. Wah. As their fists neared their targets, they suddenly shot in a different direction and the two men clasped arms, grinning madly. The larger man laughed heartily and gave Naruto a full-on hug. It's good to see you, my friend. Has been a while since you come to ring, no? With a bit of effort Naruto extricated himself from the man's grasp, chuckling quietly. Well, he wouldn't need to see a chiropractor for a bit. You hit hard as a brick, like always. It's good to see you too, Zerov. I forgot you lived up here in the north. I was planning on coming by soon, but I've been busy getting ready to move. The now dubbed Zerov's face widened with comical horror. It somehow managed to look so wrong on the burly man's face, but so perfect at the same time. No. You are not leavings forever, yes Naruto. You are stayings here in too. Akin right, the large man's fretting had already scared everyone on the street block away, leaving only them on the road. He shook his head in the negative. I'm not leaving. Actually, I'm moving closer to your house. It was true, Naruto was looking for a house in Arakawa and Zerov lived in Itachi, so they would be much closer than they were with Naruto living in Setagaya. Waterfalls poured from Zerov's eyes as the blonde cleared the air. I am glad. Very glad. Haruka would be very sad if you leave, Naruto. And little Erika has been wanting you to visit us all of the times. She begs us every day for you to come play with her. I know. You come to my house right now and we will eat lunch together. Haruka make delicious food as always. Come, come. We go now. Zerov grabbed Naruto by the arm and began dragging him along for the ride, thin rubber shavings peeling away from the tips of Naruto's shoes. Wait a second, Zerov. I have someone with me. Naruto said. Zerov stopped and put a hand above his eyes as he looked all around trying to see the person. Eyes landing on Yugen, they lit up and he strutted over to her, momentarily forgetting he was still dragging Naruto. Yugen had been standing frozen in place as her mind utterly failed to process what the hell was going on. Pieces of shrapnel lay in a circle around her feet, long since having been let go of in her shock. Naruto knew that bear of a man. She didn't even know he left the house long enough to meet people. How in the fuck did he even know someone like that? That man was easily almost 7 feet tall with a beard and goatee as thick as an animal's coat, and even his muscles had muscles. Zerov stopped in front of her, bending down to her height. Are you Naruto's friending? Oh, it is gladdening me to see that Naruto has pretty friend with him. Poor Naruto is always lonely and grumpy, so it is very good to see he has friend. You take good care of him. Without leaving her time to respond, Zerov turned back to Naruto, who was allowing gravity to lean him backwards lazily. Why do you not tell me you have pretty wife? We are friends, yes. She come to house as well. Naruto's wife must meet Haruka and say hello. Naruto simply sighed, knowing that when Zerov got on a roll, it was better to just let the energetic man do as he pleased. Yugen was still having a little trouble processing the presence of this exuberant man. It wasn't every day you met a man who looked like a bear and yet acted like he was still a young child. Zerov's words finally reaching her brain, Yugen responded. Wife. That's a bit presumptuous just because I'm a female. I suppose that isn't necessarily wrong, in a way. Zerov turned to look at Yugen, studying her with a confused look on his face. All of a sudden his face brightened and he gave a giant smile. Okay, Naruto's wife. If you say so. You come eat with us, yes. This bear man was rather amusing, Yugen decided. It certainly wouldn't hurt to go with them back to his house. The day was still young, so they had plenty of time later, and even if they didn't find a place today, there was always tomorrow. And she would get to try new food, so that was a plus. Sure, let's go back to your house. I'd like to meet some of Naruto's friends. She flicked her eyes to look at said blonde and hit a snort not too sneakily. She got a deadpan look and a single finger salute in return. She was right about the no friends thing, but he wasn't going to let her get away with that comment. Zerov gave her a megawatt smile in return so wide it forced his eyes shut. Good, good. Come, it is this way. Zerov immediately set off the direction he had come, dragging Naruto with him still. With a sigh, Naruto flipped himself out of Zerov's grip and started pacing alongside the man, arms folded behind his head. The Yugen, who was still standing in the same place, they looked like a couple of old friends who had known each other since childhood as they chatted animatedly. It was actually sort of nice to see Naruto interacting with someone besides herself. As the trio reached Zerov's house in a small neighborhood, they were greeted at the door by a woman. She was about average height for a female, 5'4", with light brown hair and a light complexion. The woman smiled lightly at them with her eyes shut and waved in greeting. Welcome home, darling. She gave Zerov a big hug before turning to her other two guests. Her smile grew a little wider. And you brought Naru-chan with you? You should have told me you were going to bring him over. I would have made more food. It's a good thing I always make extra. Zerov scratched the back of his head sheepishly and apologized. The woman walked up and hugged Naruto tightly around the neck. It's good to see you, Naru-chan. Erika has been asking for you to come over for some time now. Have you been taking care of yourself? Have you been eating well? You've been outside to get fresh air, right? The woman began looking over him and patting him down, as if she was looking for anything out of the ordinary. Haruka-san. I've been doing just fine, I promise I've been taking care of myself. My apologies for the intrusion. We bumped into Zerov while we were walking through town, and he insisted we come over. The woman waggled a finger at Naruto and chided, now Naru-chan, I've told you to just call me Haruka. Your family here with us. Taking note of her last guest, Haruka blinked in surprise before smiling at her too. How she blinked with her eyes shut was rather curious. The world may never know. And who might this lovely lady be? A friend of yours, Naru-chan? Haruka said suggestively. Zerov cut in before Naruto or Yugen could respond. This is Naruto's wife. She take good care of him, very funny. I tell him he has to bring his new wife to meeting you, and here we are. Naruto rubbed his temples and prepared for the storm about to come through. Yugen caught notice of Naruto's tension and felt a sense of dread wash over her. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she didn't like it. Haruka froze in place for a second, a dark look crossing over her face. The air was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Then all of a sudden she squealed and began wiggling around like an excited puppy dog. Naru-chan. Why didn't you tell us you had found a girlfriend? When did you meet? What did you do on your first date? Is she living with you? What are her 3 sizes? Are you already engaged? Wait, darling said you were married. When did you have the reception? Why didn't you invite us? Why, Naru-chan? I thought we were family. Haruka-chan. His words fell on deaf ears. Oh, we need to celebrate. I'll call my friends and we'll. Haruka-chan. He said a little louder. Do I have all the ingredients to bake a cake? Let's see, I have eggs, flour, sugar. Haruka-chan. He shouted. She froze, finally snapped out of her little fantasy world. We're not married, Haruka-chan. Zerov got things a little confused. She lives with me, but that's it. You haven't missed out on anything. Oh, I see, Haruka frowned. Almost as fast as it had come, the frown disappeared and was replaced by a smile. I'm sure that will change in time. Come inside. Lunch is almost ready. As they all trooped inside, Yugen walked quietly at the back of the pack. Her mind had become stormy as she watched the 3 interact. Normally, she would have been a bit overwhelmed and equal parts humorous, but something about what Naruto had said at the end rubbed her the wrong way. It was true, but it still bothered her, and she wasn't completely sure why. She knew he hadn't meant anything by what he said, but was that all he saw this as? 2 people living together like roommates. She shook her head. Naruto was much too smart to see this as simply a mutual relationship, and he had said it himself that he had been feeling better than he had in a while with her around. She could think about this later. For now, she would just enjoy her present company. Ani-chan. A speeding blur of white came flying through the dining room and smashed into Naruto's chest, nearly knocking him over. Leaning back at almost a 45-degree angle, Naruto wrapped his arms around the human missile that had crashed into him full speed. Prying said projectile off him, he held her out at arm's length with a small smile on his face. Hello, Erika-chan. Erika wriggled around in his grasp, giggling as she beamed brightly at her older brother figure. Naruto Nai-chan, I missed you. You haven't come over to play in forever. She pouted adorably at the end, forcing him to chuckle at the sheer cuteness. I'm sorry, Erika-chan. Naruto Nai has been very busy lately so he hasn't had the time to visit. We'll play some today, okay? He spun her around in the air once, eliciting a squeal of delight from the small girl, before placing her down on the ground. He ruffled her chestnut brown hair softly as she giggled. Amber eyes watched him mirthfully. And he says he's bad with people. Lunch followed shortly after, and everyone took their places at the large dining room table. Yugen sat to Naruto's right, while Erika sat to his left, humming playfully and kicking her legs. Haruka and Zerov sat on the other side of the table. Naruto would call this lunch, but it was really more of a feast. Haruka had made grilled fish, steamed rice, miso soup, grilled sprouts of several varieties, fried chicken, and braised tempura. The myriad of smells from the stocks, broths, sauces, and spices was tantalizing. The sheer quantity made sense. Zerov was a big man, and as such, he ate a lot. That and Haruka's housewife tendency to cook too much meant that every meal was a full course. No one was complaining, the woman was a great cook. As they say, the easiest way to a man's heart is through his stomach. She had even made a bowl of miso ramen just for Naruto, something that couldn't help but make him feel a little lighter. Not the ramen itself, mind you, but that she had made it. He had mentioned once in passing that when he was younger ramen had been his favorite food. It was something he hadn't eaten very much of since Ichiraku's had closed. In honor of their memory, Naruto had learned their recipe and made the dish every so often to keep the memory fresh, but it wasn't a near-daily occurrence like his younger years. The broth always tasted sharp whenever he ate it. Not only had she remembered, but she went so far as to make some just for him. Haruka was an incredibly gracious woman. She did little gestures like these all the time, it was just part of her nature. So Naru-chan, you mentioned that you had been very busy lately. What have you been up to? Haruka questioned. Speak of the angel. It had been a while since they had last brought Naruto over, so there was much to catch up on. Like the pretty girl he had brought with him, for example. She still really wanted to know how that had happened. Naruto was always so dark and dreary that she had almost given up hope on him ever finding a special someone. It seemed she had been worried all this time for nothing. I've been preparing to move. Noticing the panicked look on her face, Naruto quickly amended his statement. I'm not leaving Tokyo. Zerov thought the same thing. I'm actually trying to find a place around Irakawa here in the north, so I'll actually be much closer to your house. Haruka placed a hand to her chest and let out a sigh of relief. You had me worried for a second there, Naru-chan. I'm glad you're not leaving. All of us would be very sad if you did. Zerov and Erika nodded at that. Yes, Naruto. I'd be very sad if you do not come to Ring anymore. We have many fistings of friendships to do. Naruto's sweat dropped and Yugen snickered at Zerov's awkward choice of words. The Russian man was doing his best to get used to speaking Japanese, but if he hadn't gotten the hang of it in the several years he had been here, he likely never would. It was actually funnier this way. It had become a part of his character. An evil look crossed Haruka's face as she slowly turned to look at her husband. "Darling, you wouldn't happen to still be going to that nasty fighting club, would you?" Zerov shrunk in on himself as a bead of sweat fell down his face. "No, dearest. I definitely am not going to the club of fighting, and I did not win the tournament last week. Not Zerov, no." He waved his hands placatingly in front of his face as he tried to appease his angry wife. Haruka turned to look at Naruto and began putting the pressure on him. If Naruto was fazed, he didn't show it as he sedately chewed a piece of grilled fish. "Naru-chan, Zerov-chan hasn't been fighting again, has he? I would hate so much to hear that either of you had been back to that dirty place." Swallowing, Naruto shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "I haven't been there in a while. I'm not sure since it's been a bit, but I don't recall seeing Zerov there recently." It was true, but only because he had been absent the last few weeks, something that had probably caused a touch of panic. He was sure Zerov had been going, he rarely missed any time at the ring. If he wasn't there for several days, something must be incredibly wrong. He knew for fact that the last time he had been, Zerov had been there as well. The dark aura faded away from Haruka and she smiled brightly. "I see. That's good. Let's get back to lunch, now. We wouldn't want the food I spent so much time on to go cold." Beside her, Zerov silently clapped his hands together in prayer, thanking Naruto for saving his hide. Naruto snorted lightly and continued eating his meal. Yugen, who once again had been quiet, spoke up. "Actually, Naruto, how do you all know each other? Is it this fighting club you all keep mentioning?" Naruto's eyes rose from his plate to answer her query. "That's right," he affirmed. "A while back I became part of an underground fighting ring where people from all over come to fight in the daily tournaments. Lots of money flows through those doors, so it was even better in my mind. I met Zerov in that ring. During my first few days there I managed to beat every single person who challenged me. Then Zerov and I had a match. That was the hardest I had worked to win out of any fight I had so far. We hit it off well outside of the matches, and it sort of blossomed from there. Zerov is a bit of character, so it's never boring. He convinced me to come home and have dinner with him one day, and that's when I met these two lovely ladies." Erika preened and puffed out her chest at being called a lady, while Haruka brought a hand up to her cheek. "My, Naru-chan, you're so sweet. I'm a taken woman though, my heart belongs to my darling only." Zerov's eyes became big and watery, and he hugged his wife tight. "Ah, Haruka-chan. Zerov is very lucky to have you. I am blessed to have such a good family." Erika hopped up and ran around the table to burrow her way into the hug. Naruto watched the family with a small, sad smile on his face. This reminded him of back when he was young, back when he still had. For a split second, he saw himself in Zerov's place, hugging a woman and two kids, people all around them smiling brightly as they laughed together. A singular tear leapt from the corner of his eye, unnoticed by the bonding family. He jumped slightly when he felt a hand squeeze his forearm gently. Yugen locked eyes with him wordlessly, a sympathetic look on her face. She scooted her chair closer and leaned up against his shoulder in silent reassurance. He mouthed a thank you to her and remained with her like that until the family broke apart and returned to lunch. He could see the look in the two adults' eyes and he knew what it meant. They were going to do some personal bonding. That was something he could help with. "Say, how about I take Erika with Yugen and I? We were planning on taking a little walk so I can take her while you two enjoy a little time alone together." He fidgeted nervously at the grateful, watery-eyed look the pair gave him. Waterfalls poured from their eyes at his words, making the scene highly comical to watch. "Naru-chan's the best. Naruto is bestest friend." They shouted at the same time. Naruto couldn't hold it anymore and burst out into actual laughter, the first time he had done so in a long, long time. Naruto and Yugen walked the streets of Tokyo, simply enjoying the early afternoon sunshine and light breeze in the air. It was still cool in the late spring season, and it wouldn't be long before the heat began to sweep the concrete city. The trees were full of vibrant blossoms, shading the world with pinks and greens and yellows, synonymous with the season of rebirth. Birds chirped from tree branches and the insects and squirrels riddled the air in a lively cacophony. Naruto enjoyed the spring and the fall the most. The vernal season was filled with new life and the blossoming of nature, a sight that he found truly beautiful. Nature chakra was at its most pure during spring, and being a sage, he was enveloped in the chakra of the world almost constantly. Any disposition of the energy he too would feel. In other words, if the chakra was lively, he too felt the radiance. As for fall, he just loved the autumnal colors as the departure of the leaves dyed the ground in its hues. The holidays, the atmosphere, he loved it all. The day was a perfect vernal day to simply enjoy the outdoors with no worries on the mind. Erika sat atop Naruto's shoulders with her arms around his neck, a giant smile like her father on her face. She hummed some unknown song to herself as she enjoyed spending time with her pseudo-older brother. Yugen once again found herself watching Naruto and silently thinking about him. He was truly an enigma, one that she was still so far from figuring out. She had remained reticent for the last few hours, unsure of what to do or say around these strange new people. She was sure she would become accustomed to these people with time, but for now she felt uncomfortable trying to be a part of the dynamic. She felt a little bad about that, actually. She didn't want to come across as a bad guest. But that was the thing, Naruto always said that he didn't have anyone and that he was completely alone. Yet here they were, walking through the street with a little girl who absolutely adored him and a family who openly invited him to their table to break bread. Naruto always acted like there wasn't a reason in the world for him to stick around, and yet here he was chatting and laughing like any other person. She almost couldn't believe it was the same Naruto she had come to know and love. Odd, that was still a surreal thought. Despite his moody, aloof, almost abrasive personality sometimes, she still cared about him deeply. A good part of that was the bond, she surmised, but not all of it. She genuinely did care about him. She wouldn't go saying that aloud though, no one better expect her to be all mushy. That wasn't her thing, and neither was it Naruto's. She was going to figure him out one day. It may not be today or tomorrow, but she would eventually. She was going to be with him for a long time, so there was no rush. Naruto's eyes narrowed. There was someone here with a chakra signature that he didn't recognize, and it was too large to be a civilian. His head snapped upwards. Yugen, watch out. A rod of steel shot out of Yugen's sleeve just in time to intercept the blade that had been aimed at her head. A single moment later and she would have been skewered. She immediately snapped to full alert as she searched for the source of the attack. So you blocked, number 66. I suppose I'm not surprised, you always were the best of us. The sudden introduction of an unfamiliar voice brought them to the target of their search. On top of a nearby light pole stood a raven-haired woman in a kimono with unnecessarily large sleeves. The only clothing that adorned her legs was a pair of black stockings and wooden jeta, making for an odd blend of two different styles. She leapt down to the ground, giving a free shot of her purple panties, and bent her knees to absorb the impact. The jump from that distance didn't even seem to faze her, but that wasn't impressive in present company. Both Yugen and Naruto were able to do the same. Strutting forward at an eased pace, the mystery woman stopped about 15 feet away from them, a smirk adorning her face the entire way. The woman sort of reminded Naruto of a Hyuga with the attire, arrogant smirk, and measured pace, as well as reminding him of Tenten with the dagger she had thrown. Dear God, is this what would have happened if Neji and Tenten had ever gotten together? He shuddered at the thought. A jerk with a pointy weapon obsession was an unsafe combination. Yugen returned the expression to the woman who had so rudely interrupted her walk. She knew this person very well. Well, if it isn't number 61, what an unpleasant surprise. You know it's rude to show up uninvited. That's an offense that can't go unpunished, you know. The grin on number 61's face threatened to split it in two. My apologies. When I saw you walking so casually down the street, I couldn't help but try to cut you a third eye. I've been waiting so very long to put a knife in that pretty little head of yours. So tell me, how do you intend to stop me? In response, Yugen's eyes narrowed. Number 61 knew that she was the bane of just about every weapon using Sekirei's existence. She could simply leech the metal away from their weapons, and that was it. If she was this beepy, she had to have something up her sleeve. Yugen had a feeling she knew what that was, now all she had to do was confirm it. Raising an eyebrow, Yugen incredulously retorted, you do realize what my powers are, don't you? If you've already forgotten from all those beatings I gave you, then you must have lost your sad little mind. Number 61 barked out a short laugh, but otherwise didn't seem to take the bait in Yugen's words. Oh, I'm well aware. I think you'll find that these daggers of mine won't be so easy to control anymore. To prove her point, number 61 withdrew two daggers from her sleeves and charged straight at Yugen, signaling that the fight had begun. In an instant, liquid metal poured from Yugen's sleeves, forming into the plate armor Naruto had first seen her wearing and a broadsword in her right hand. She glanced over her shoulder and locked eyes with Naruto. That look said all he needed to know even before the words left her mouth. Take the girl and go. I'll hold the witch off while you retreat. I'll be fine, promise. I won't lose to a punk like her. As she was speaking, she matched number 61's hurried pace with her sword, poised to remove the offending woman's head from her shoulders. Naruto didn't hesitate to get moving. Turning away from the fight, he took off at full speed, making sure to hold on to Erika so she wouldn't fly off his shoulders. Ani-chan, what's going on? Is the pretty lady going to be alright? Where are we going? Despite the wind dripping by their faces, Naruto heard Erika speak and made sure his voice was loud enough for her to hear in kind. Yugen is just saying hello to an old friend, Erika-chan. Don't worry, she'll be alright. I'm going to take you back home and then come help her, okay? Erika didn't look completely convinced, but she nodded all the same. Her older brother was the best, so she would trust what he was saying. He was as strong as her daddy, so no one could beat him in a fight. He ran for a solid minute before ducking into a nearby alleyway and looking to make sure nobody could see them. Facing the girl, he put a finger to his lips, motioning for her to stay quiet. Erika-chan, would you like to see a magic trick? Sparkles entered Erika's eyes and she nodded her head fervently, showing that she was still very much a kid. Naruto chuckled, okay, cover your eyes for a second and I'll start the magic trick. Just promise me you won't tell anybody about my trick, alright? Don't even tell Zerov and Haruka. It will be our little secret, nah? He winked at her. She gave him a cute smile and covered her eyes with her hands, bouncing in place with anticipation. Naruto shook his head at her excitement. It wouldn't really matter if she did tell anyone what he was about to do, they would think it was just the hyperbolic nature of an 8-year-old. He was just going to run fast enough to give her a thrill, but not so fast that any passers-by may find it suspicious. They would just think he was a professional athlete or something. Making his signature hand seal, another Naruto appeared next to the original in a puff of smoke. With a follow-up hand seal, he and the clone switched places, with the clone now holding the little girl. Giving each other a quick nod, the real Naruto bolted out of the alley back towards Yugen. He wasn't about to leave her to fight by herself, after all. Yugen shifted to her back foot as a knife intended for her ribsage sliced through the air with ease. The aggressive Ravenet had been forcing a close-quarters conflict for the last several minutes, doing her best to give Yugen no room to breathe. That was probably the smartest thing she could do, seeing as her weapon choices were limited. While she could use her knives as single-use projectiles, that was a pretty ineffective tactic without a proper setup. Yugen didn't have that problem. An armor-clad foot scraped the concrete as she pivoted with a powerful retaliation, sword only missing the kimono-clad woman by inches when she folded her body away from the blade. That was fine, the attack hadn't been intended to hit. The knife wielder was not delayed for long as she entered attacking range with an overhead swing. Rather than block the incoming strike, Yugen held her blade aloft with the edge facing out. Number 61 was forced to redirect her angle, lest she lose her hand in the process. While the woman was distracted from above, Yugen lashed out with a kick that hit the Ravenet in the chest. As her opponent stumbled backwards from the harsh blow, she chained her counter with several shards of iron from her sleeves. Since she was still off balance, there would be no dodging the quickly approaching shrapnel. The woman ignored her aching sternum in favor of her imminent survival. Gnashing her teeth, she swiftly slipped a handful of daggers between her fingers and launched the weapons, meeting the deadly scraps mid-air and sending them all to the ground with a series of loud clinks. She drew 2 more daggers from within the folds of her kimono in preparation. Yugen wasn't the only one with a couple of tricks up her sleeves. Thanks to her making use of the weapons at range, she had enough time to catch a slash that would have bisected her in a cross block between the daggers, creating a shower of steel as they vied for supremacy. Their arms trembled as they put all their power into dominating the exchange, though it was clear that Yugen was stronger as the much larger blade got closer and closer to number 61's neck, forcing the woman to arch her back to keep her skull intact. Using her compromised position, number 61 conceded the exchange and rolled backwards, deftly leaping to her feet and charging right back in at Yugen. Each blow she rained down on the woman was deflected expertly and with little effort, something that infuriated number 61 more and more as they continued. In her anger, her attacks became sloppy, sacrificing precision for raw strength. That was more than enough for Yugen to capitalize on. After one particularly wide swing, Yugen knocked the Ravenet off balance by catching the blade on her guard and forcing it to overextend, punching her square in the face as a consequence. She teetered backwards and held her now bleeding nose, glaring figurative daggers at Yugen. The woman was forced to let go of her damaged nose as Yugen gave her no mercy, reflecting the previous flow of battle on the disadvantaged number 61 with a barrage of swordplay. Have you had enough yet? Neither you nor any of the other 60s have ever beaten me in a fight, and it won't change now. Just because you have stone instead of steel doesn't mean a thing. I don't need to be able to control your blade to kick your sorry ass. She bit out between swipes. Number 61 screamed bloody murder as she did her utmost to eviscerate the green-haired woman, to no avail. Fuck you, 66. I've always hated you and your goddamned arrogant attitude. Always acting like you were better than us. Not anymore. I'm going to cut you up so badly they won't even recognize you when they come to pick you up. She was getting under her skin, good. This was only going to make her job even easier. Yugen smirked, TSK, TSK. Just because you're a jester and all the other girls like me more than you doesn't mean you need to get your panties in a twist. I don't act arrogant, I'm just better than you. There's a difference, you see. Arrogance is only arrogance if it isn't warranted. Number 61 jabbed both daggers forward, hoping to shred both her kidneys and put the beepy bastard down permanently. She was going to impale this beepy, no good cunt if it was the last thing she'd die. It's over. Her body suddenly and violently met pavement at Mach speed, cracking the pavement and a rib or two for good measure. Her knives clattered to the ground several feet from the crash site and skittered across the pavement far out of reach. Naruto landed on the ground and shook his fist, flexing the digits rhythmically. Thanks. My fingers were a little tense, but they're all loose now. That feels way better. The impact had made her mind go fuzzy for a moment from how heavily she landed. Eyes swimming, she strained to get a look at the one who had sneak attacked her. She was rather bewildered to see that it was the blonde man from earlier. So he had come back after getting rid of the child, huh? For a human, he hit hard. There was no way he was normal. Was he really human? If that was Yugen's Ashikabi, she wouldn't be shocked. Neither of those freaks were normal. Dragging herself out of the Rekage, number 61 spit out a glob of blood and drew another pair of daggers from her sleeves. Damn, now there were two of them. No matter, she would still kill them at all costs. Yugen's eyes never left her opponent as she addressed Naruto. What are you doing here? What did you do with the little girl? I took her back home and made my way here. I figured you had this handled, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Can't have my boredom relief go kicking the bucket on me now. He rolled his neck with a series of satisfying pops and hopped on the balls of his feet. Well, that's certainly impressive. I'm curious to know how you got there and back so fast, but that will have to wait for later. I can handle her. It was more of a statement than a request as she walked out to meet her stationary opponent. Alright. I'll be here. This should be entertaining. He walked out of the street and rested against a telephone pole to watch the conflict unfold. Number 61 growled at their banter. They were both insufferable. Just try it, bitch. She leapt high into the air, leaving the Ashikabi-Sekirei pair behind on the surface. Beeping her daggers and twisting her body, she prepared to let her weapons fly, but never got the chance. Yugen pointed two fingers towards the sky, and the street split open as several pipes shot up to meet the airborne attacker. Number 61's eyes widened in alarm. She wouldn't be able to dodge this in midair. The only way out was through. Showing her proficiency with her weapon, she slashed the tips of the pipes to pieces like bamboo, leaving the figurative fangs blunted. Once the direct danger of impalement had passed, she flipped herself over and used the pacified pipes to propel herself forward, blades extended outwards like a human arrow. Hopping back as the enraged female streaked through the air, Yugen stayed just out of range of the attack. Stone shivs met pavement rather than bone, entrenching themselves deep into the earth. Taking advantage of her opponent's momentary pinning, Yugen summoned a wall of metal behind number 61 and thundered towards her. Diving up the burrowed blades, 61 immediately put as much distance as she could between herself, the wall, and the green-haired woman, and not a moment too soon. Tendrils of liquid metal grasped like fingers at where she had been only a second before, searching desperately for their quarry. She knew how adept 66 was with her elemental control. If her foe was anywhere near the material, it was game over. Backflipping several times, she launched knife after knife at the steel freight train that was Yugen, but the blades did little to halt her approach. The only reason they were even a bother was their capability to puncture her armor when thrown. Used as a slashing weapon, they could barely make a scratch, which was exactly what allowed Yugen to remain so calm while under fire. Drawing a stream of metal from underground, Yugen coated her broadsword in the excess and slashed at the empty air. It may have looked insane had scythe-like curves of the material not begun flying off of the European brand, screaming through the distance between the two fighters. Naruto watched the scene with rapt attention as the two danced back and forth. The clashing of steel on steel and blades flying through the air was a bit memorial for him. This actually felt really nice to watch, despite the mortality of it. He trusted Yugen enough to win this. You know, where was Miss Purple Panties keeping all those shivs? It was like an inmate's wet dream. She had thrown so many and yet didn't look at all perturbed about the possibility of running out. Maybe it was one of those secret female pocket dimensions he had heard about. Better than the Uchiha's damn Kamui. Mysteries of the universe, he supposed. Taking a deep breath in, Naruto leaned further against a wooden post. He had to give her credit, Yugen's power was pretty incredible. She could call it from wherever she wanted, make it into anything she wanted, and use it however she wanted. The only limit was the type of metal she could control, but the ones she did have some accord with were some of the most common. And who knew she was so skilled with a sword? She was no master, but she could have made for a decent samurai if she had lived several hundred years ago. It would have probably been more accurate to say a knight of medieval Europe, what with the armor and broadsword. The only problem would have been hiding her identity as a female in both cases. Dean Dark may have been able to do it, but he was pretty sure she didn't have boobs as big as Yugen. Binding them down with bandages wouldn't do jack shit, he had seen her in bandages firsthand, and they were completely useless against her size. Hottest mummy he had ever seen, and he knew Cleopatra VII before she died. The woman had been almost as kinky with snakes as Anko. Back to the situation at hand, Naruto knew Yugen was good with ranged and incapacitation attacks, but he may have been wrong to assume that was how she usually fought. He had only gotten to see her fight against electricity, which had forced her to give up her armor and fight at a distance, so he really had no clue as to her capabilities. Between her armor and her close combat skills, range techniques, and free-range control to use metal as she pleased, she was formidable. Naruto watched as Yugen launched another arc of steel from her sword, carving a furrow into the ground. The damage to the environment was going to be hard to cover up and even harder to explain. Now that he thought about it, this whole situation was really bad. By some divine miracle there had been no one on the street besides them, so there was at least that. He doubted that he and Yugen would be getting out of this scot-free, regardless of their victory and the fight being purely reactionary. They were fighting in the north and within the public eye, both of which were punishable offenses, according to what Shisei had told him. Minaka had been rather generous with his leniency, but he was dubious to believe that everything would be waived this time. Naruto himself would face the music when it became a pressing issue. After all, he could have stopped this long before it became a violation or even a proper fight. Might as well enjoy the action while he could. Cutting down the many projectiles bombarding her with ease, Yugen halted her dashing assault. Raising a hand she streaked two fingers through the air, pointing to the street then towards the elusive dagger wielder. More pipes burst out of the ground and flew like bullets at her command, eager to please their summoner. Number 61 dodged them easily enough, spears of iron passing her by harmlessly. She barely got out of the way in time as one of the sower javelins attacked from behind, forcing her upwards on top of a light pole. Several strands of severed hair floated on the wind, proving just how near a miss it had been. Eyes widening, she let gravity take hold as she dropped to the earth, dodging a coalition of spikes that had nearly cost her her head. As soon as she moved, they changed course, staying hot on her trail. They were tracking her, she whipped her head towards the immobile knight who grinned gleefully at her predicament. That conniving son of a bitch. Tossing two daggers as a distraction, the woman hit the ground and instantly sped toward 66. Forced to give up her control lest she be pierced by the sharpened stone, Yugen contorted her body sideways, making use of the minimum amount of motion necessary to evade. She plunged her sword into the ground and swung her hands around like claws in front of her. At first, it seemed nothing had happened, but it became apparent that something was going on when the black-haired woman stopped moving. Suddenly blood erupted across number 61's body, her face set in a visage of pain. Thin wires had sliced into her entire body, chaining her in place. She snarled as she realized what had happened. The durable strings had emerged out of the discarded scrap junkyard littering the road like a giant cage. Her face smashed into the concrete as the wires yanked her down, black spots appearing in her vision. Like snakes the wires slithered across the ground, pulling the battered woman along like a sack of potatoes. Rocks and rugged concrete tore into her bruised body, only exacerbating her wounds. The string sedately pulled her to the wall Yugen had created and then up it, melding into the surface. She winced as they pulled tight, effectively crucifying her on the surface. What's more, the wall itself had morphed around her arms and legs, trapping her in its embrace. She started struggling with every last bit of energy she had to no avail, causing the wires to only dig deeper into her flesh. While weapon Sekirei were stronger than the average elemental Sekirei, they were still no combat type. She couldn't rip through steel like they could, and she couldn't cut it down with outer weapons. She turned to glare at the approaching green-haired woman. Damn, number 66 knew her too well. The wall had engulfed her hand specifically. This was it. Blood welled in her mouth as pain coursed through her entire body. The crimson liquid fell from the corners of her mouth like a waterfall, jumping ship like the Titanic. She could taste the iron. Gods, even the blood that flowed through her veins had her damnable element in it. She grinned through dyed teeth. At least this was one thing she couldn't control. Walking towards the woman at a leisurely pace, Yugen stood in front of her and looked down condescendingly. Yugen deftly sliced both of 61's immobilized legs and then her arms, making sure they wouldn't be able to function until after she was deactivated. She planted an armored knee into the woman's gut and smashed the hilt of her sword into the back of number 61's skull when she hunched forward, sending stars through her vision. Placing her sword at the woman's neck, she ended her brutal assault. Caught in the web like the insect you are. Any last words before I finish you? Damn you. She spat with vitriol, actually spitting out a glob of blood and saliva at Yugen in pure spite. Yugen watched as it fell short and hit the ground, mixing with the pooled blood already present. So be it. With no further discussion, Yugen stabbed her sword clean into number 61's stomach. Naruto started clapping as he made his way to stand beside his partner. Well done indeed. Though I think it was obvious she was no match for you, I have to say that was incredibly entertaining. Nice work, Yugen. He liked the touch with the wires. Ninja wire was just so useful. Nostalgia. She shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly and smirked triumphantly. HMPH, what can I say? I aim to please. That was a pretty fun warm-up. A loud cackle escaped Naruto's lips. That's what I like to hear. Number 61 threw up a huge amount of blood as she slowly went unconscious from blood loss. They had already forgotten her existence, as if even as she died she was nothing more than a nuisance. Her last conscious thought was, her Ashikabi is as much of a prick as she is. The trio waved at Naruto and Yugen as they left, an action which they returned with equal effort. Take care Naru-chan. Come back to see us soon, you hear? You are always welcome in this house, no matter what. You too, Yugen-chan. See you Oni-chan. I want to play again soon. Come back too pretty lady. We'll all have fun together. Be seeing you soon, my friend. Come to club soon, all of the peoples are doing the missing of you. Baruka turned to glare at Zerov as he waved his hands in front of his face, swearing up and down that he wasn't talking about the underground pit. Naruto chuckled jovially and Yugen simply smiled as they left. They were such an odd little family, but one that could burrow their way into the heart of anyone with their antics. I'll be back soon. We'll be sure to invite you to the housewarming party when we find a new place. Naruto and Yugen walked with a comfortable hush as they returned to their search. They hadn't lost much time with the unexpected skirmish, not anything more than they had been planning on spending on the walk with Erika. It was likely only 4 o'clock or so based off of the setting sun. They were each watching separate sides of the road, only occasionally stopping to point a house out to the other. None had lasted more than a minute or so of discussion, though. They weren't being picky or anything, none of the houses had been particularly extraordinary in their minds. Yugen was the first to break the silence on non-proprietorial topics. You said that the CEO declared fighting in the north forbidden, right? What was she doing up here? I don't think number 61 was winged, so maybe just a random occurrence. Naruto shrugged, probably. I agree about her being unwinged, I doubt an Ashikabi would knowingly risk the penalty. Seemed like she had a vendetta against you, so maybe she was just in the area, but only engaged combat because it was you. She tilted her head in ponderance and nodded, that was probably right. Yeah, that's the most likely case. Though Sekirei were mostly kept in isolation, we did spend some time together. All of the 60s met as a group whenever the researchers allowed us. Most of the time it was for sparring to test our adjusted powers, but sometimes we were left to just test our ability to interact socially. Both of those were required of our exit test. 61 always hated me because I was the best of the 60s and was respected by all the others. When I was the first to pass the exit test, she must have thrown a huge fit. Her movement lapsed when she realized Naruto was no longer walking beside her. Turning around she saw him standing several feet back with his eyes glued to a house. Following his line of sight, she too paused to marvel at the sight. This was exactly like what they were looking for. It was a large 2-story traditional Japanese abode, complete with a fence and large yard. The atmosphere here felt regal almost. The place stood out in the middle of this modern district, a standing relic of a dynasty past. Too bad there wasn't a sign out for rent or purchase. If there was another like this one in the area, they would be lucky. Ara, can I help you with something, good sir? Naruto snapped from his wonder, catching notice of a woman standing on the steps of the house with a broom. He blinked. What was with him bumping into all of these beautiful women lately? The woman standing on the porch was wearing a white haori and purple hakama held together by a matching purple obi, tied right beneath her sizable bust. Upon her feet were a standard pair of samurai. Her attire was reminiscent of the shimizoku of a maiko, or shrine maiden, but there were a number of smaller differences that separated the two styles of attire. Her long, lavender hair was tied back into a ponytail by a white ribbon, and the bangs that fell in her face brought out the beauty of her features perfectly. Her round, brown borderline scarlet eyes stared at him curiously, gauging his reactions with a level of scrutiny that made him feel like she was no ordinary housewife. Though he couldn't make out much of the rest of her figure thanks to the conservative nature of her dress, he could tell from her perfect curvaceous hips that she had amazing legs too. All in all she was an extremely beautiful woman, a Yamato Nadeshiko if he had ever seen one. His beepasis had only lasted a second, so his pause seemed like a normal response. He wouldn't throw that conception by hesitating longer. Ah, my apologies Maiko-san. My friend and I have been preparing to move from our current residence in Setagaya and have been on the lookout for a house. There has been an increased amount of violent activity there, so we felt it best to move to the north. I just had to stop and stare at your beautiful house, it's exactly like what we've been looking for. My apologies for being a bit peculiar. I'll be on my way. Take care Maiko-san. The Maiko brought a hand to her face and closed her eyes in a distinctly I smile sort of way. My, how polite. I certainly couldn't let such a nice young man just leave after complimenting my home in such a manner. As it happens, I have plenty of space here at Maison Izumo and only one tenant beside myself occupying it. If you'd like, I'd be happy to have a pair of new tenants. Naruto was caught off guard by her statement. His luck with life had always been rather terrible. Back in the days when he was a young shinobi, trouble seemed to follow him like a puppy dog from the Inuzuka clan. This sounds too good to be true. A beautiful house and a beautiful landlady to match. I think my terrible luck may have finally changed. We would be most grateful to stay here, Maiko-san. The woman giggled from behind her hand, seemingly taking his words in stride. I see we have a flatterer here. Whatever is a poor housewife like me to do around such debauchery? Please, come in. I'll start a pot of tea and we can discuss the rest then. She slid open the front door and walked inside, likely on her way to the kitchen as she had said. Naruto turned slowly to look at Yugen with a wide grin on his face. Well, would you look at that, Yugen-chan. You can admit it, I'm the best. Rolling her eyes at his idiocy, she passed right by him and made her way to the door. Just get your ass inside. I'd rather not have your tomfoolery cost us this opportunity. He only smirked harder at her words, acquiescing nonetheless. Several minutes later the woman returned from the kitchen carrying a tray with 3 cups and a kettle containing the refreshing liquid. Her guests sat waiting at the dinner table in Seiza, giving their undivided attention as she walked in. She received 2 grateful nods and a muttering of appreciation as she distributed the cups and poured them both tea. Thank you for waiting. I hope the tea is to your liking. Naruto smiled at her as he gingerly picked up the cup with his right hand and placed it in his left palm. Rotating it 90 degrees so that the front was no longer facing him, he took a sip and sighed in contentment. She had brewed a pot of green tea, which was standard, but the flavor was anything from ordinary. It tasted wonderful. Naruto savored the taste as it spread across his tongue, the heat of the beverage only adding to his opinion. He hadn't had a cup of tea this good in a very long time. He could brew it just as well if not better, as difficult a task as that may be, but he had been around for a very long time and had had a lot of practice. This was a normal woman as far as he could tell, so it was incredibly impressive. Though he was already starting to believe that that was not the case. How she had studied him earlier, how she spoke, and how she held herself were all not that of an average civilian. No, she was much too elegant and poised for that. He knew all the nuances of people much too well, and she was too perfect to be human. She was like that silver-haired woman he had bumped into a few days ago, a warrior. And maybe, just maybe, she was not of the mortal coil, just as he was. The morbid thought actually sent his heart fluttering with a slight twinge of something he had not felt in many years' hope. This is an excellent cup of tea, Maiko-san. I haven't had tea this good in a very long time. Yugen nodded her head in concurrence, agreeing with his statement wholeheartedly. She giggled in the way Naruto was already starting to recognize as her signature. I'm glad you like it. There's no need to call me Maiko, I'm no shrine maiden. My name is Miya. Asama Miya. May I ask for your names? Scratching his head, Naruto realized that once again he had forgotten a big part of social interaction. Telling someone your name was a big necessity. He really needed to get readjusted to this. Ah, my apologies, Miya-san. My name is Naruto, Namikaze Naruto. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please look after me. Miya nodded at him, the pleasure is all mine, Naruto-san. Turning to look at the other woman in the room, Miya waited for her response. Yugen put down her cup of tea. Locking eyes with Miya, she gave her opening. My name is Yugen. No family name. Nice to meet you. Miya smiled, likewise, Yugen-san. Introductions out of the way, Miya turned back to Naruto and addressed something that caught her eye. She had been watching his every movement thus far and he had already started making a favorable impression. He was meticulous with his drinking of the tea, his posture, and his polite way of speaking. Not many people nowadays even knew the proper ways, let alone used them. She was already starting to like this young man, and they had only just met. Naruto-san, you seem well versed in Japanese tradition. I'm impressed with your knowledge of formality. A smile gracefully danced onto his face as she made her observation known. Of course she had noticed, he knew she would. Any warrior worth their steel would be able to see the subtleties of his motions with little trouble. Being aware of your surroundings was a must on and off the battlefield for them. I've been around the block a few times. But this day and age has come to the point where practicing tradition as a commodity is a true tragedy. Traditional values were one of the few things he could carry with him from the past. There was a certain appeal to archiving the historic ways of life, and Naruto considered himself the ultimate archivist of such knowledge. He knew traditions that even the most formal of individuals would have no inkling of. Most times he didn't make use of them, but then again he was seldom in contact with other people. Formalities were not a necessity in the sanctity of your own home. Miya was amazed. The young blonde got more intriguing with every word he said. I agree, Naruto-san. I must say it is rather heartening to find someone who shares the sentiment. She laughed and amended, though, you sound like an old man when you speak like that. Something about him made her just want to tease him. It was rather odd, considering she had never been one to do so, even when her husband was alive. She had not been close to another man in any manner since then, so that she already was starting to relax around this man she had only met minutes prior was alarming. Mia couldn't say that it was a bad thing. In fact, it might be nice to have someone like him around. His personable and easygoing nature from what she could tell made interacting with him a relaxed event. Glancing at the stifled green-haired woman, Yugen, she found herself wondering about her as well. Judging off of their interaction and what she could gather of their relationship, Yugen was likely a Sekirei. She knew enough about their kind to recognize one when she saw one. Mia didn't know what to make of her yet, seeing as she hadn't spoken much, but her intuition told her she was good as well. If they truly meant to escape the violence of the Sekirei plan as they had said, then she was more than happy to aid them. Rubbing the back of his head, Naruto pouted and hunched over. Well, when you get to be old like me, you find yourself often reminiscent. You should enjoy your youth while you're young and pretty. His eyes roamed between Mia and Yugen, while playing the part of the stereotypical wizened old man perfectly. It was true, no matter his looks. Mia giggled at his words, my, Naruto-san, maybe you should be moving into a retirement home instead. Yugen crowed in satisfaction, ha. See, I'm not the only one who thinks that. She grinned cheekily at her fellow female. I think we'll get along just fine, Mia-san. I think we will, Yugen-san. The blonde sighed in defeat. Now there were two people he had to contend with, and what's worse, they were tag-teaming him. He began muttering about mean women picking on poor defenseless old men and how he wished he had stopped Boredom-chan before she got him into troublesome scenarios. Alright, let's get on to business now. Here at Maison Uzume rent is 50,000 per room a month. I will take care of preparing meals and a number of the household chores, but I would appreciate help. The only rules I have are no violence and no lewd activity. Naruto looked utterly taken aback. That was it. He could easily pay for the entire inn and not even be bothered, so money was no concern, but that was still a startling price. And if those were her only rules, then this would be a pretty easy place to live. They really had struck jackpot. Are you sure that's all you need? That price is incredibly generous, you can't find a place anywhere for that amount. I can easily pay you more than that, it would be no trouble at all. Both of the women in the room were astonished, neither expecting those words to come out of his mouth. For Yugen it was because he had never struck her as the type to do such a thing. As my grandparents always say, honest we are, stupid we're not. She knew he was thoughtful, but this was new even to her. Though to be fair, it could be because they had not been in such a position before. Mia's eyes were wide, and she found herself momentarily speechless. Out of anything he could have said, she had not been prepared for that. He was actually offering to pay more. What was with this convoluted blonde? Most anyone would have kept their mouth shut and their money in their pocket. Him? He offered to pay more. This man was of a different breed. There was a certain air of mystique, wisdom, and something else she couldn't place about him. The feeling was exotic, like the first visage of something completely foreign that surrealistically shocked the conscious with its arrival. In a way, it was alluring. I'm going to have to keep an eye on him. Leaving her thoughts for later, Mia smiled beatifically. There's no need, Naruto-san. My husband always believed in never turning someone away in need, and that includes monetary reasons. Though I'm very grateful for your offer, I won't change my standards even for that sort of benefit. Naruto nodded to her and addressed Yugen, would you like to have separate rooms, Yugen? I don't mind covering an extra room if you would prefer that. Now it was Yugen's turn to be astounded. Seriously, what was with her Ashikabi? One moment he was moody and abrasive, the next he treated her like his wife. No, I'm fine with staying in the same room. There's no need for pointless excess. Alright. I'd like to rent one room, Mia-san. I can pay you rent for the month right now. Proving his point, he pulled his wallet out of his pocket and began rifling through bills, exposing the nature of his wealth. Did he have a book hidden in his wallet? Bowing slightly, he presented the money to Mia. Gracefully, she thanked him and took the offering. Thank you, Naruto-san. I'll have your room ready in a little bit, I just need some time to prepare it. The room number is 202, it's the first door on the left once you go up the stairs. Are you going to stay the night here or return home and move in tomorrow? Before he answered, he looked over at his partner, the look in his eyes telling her that he was deferring the choice to her. Yugen thought about it for a moment, coming to her decision without much deliberation. We'll stay the night at our current residence and move everything tomorrow. We still need to pack, since we hadn't been expecting to find a place so soon. Naruto agreed with her statement. It would be nice to stay one last night in his old home for sentiment and nostalgia's sake. He had been living in that apartment for years now, almost since the establishment was built. He had been living in Tokyo under different henge forms since it was called Edo, so he had to relocate every so often when the city was renovated. It hadn't been a particularly difficult feat to hide within the walls over the years, seeing as it was so large. Though when the modern age had rolled in, he had moved away for several decades, deciding instead to live in Germany for a bit. It had really been awkward when World War II broke out. He was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and living in Germany. Keeping his Japanese nationality under wraps and going with the flow had been a really good idea at the time. He had returned to Japan in a hurry, making his home in the highland range of the Akashi Mountains as a sage. Nostalgia. When he finally departed the mountains for Tokyo once more under his normal guise, he had found that housing complex. It was right around the turn of the millennia then. You would think someone would have noticed him, but that wasn't the case. No one was paying that much attention for supernatural events, such as in Unijing Man. He kept himself mostly uninvolved from the public, so he went undetected. If the government ever did notice, he would simply disappear. He had hideouts all over the world and nothing but time. If it ever came to that, he was sure Yugen wouldn't mind getting out of the plan. That sounds fine with me. If it's no trouble, we'll stay here for a bit until we need to retire for the night. Lia hummed in acknowledgement. I see no issue with that. It would be nice to have you stay for a few more hours. We can use that time to get to know each other a little better. Unfortunately our other tenant is out working, so he'll have to introduce himself some other time. Naruto smirked at her mischievously. He couldn't keep his nature at bay for long. What? I'm in a room with two pretty ladies all by myself. I must be a lucky man indeed. Yugen grunted and stared out the window unabashed, but if you looked closely you could see a bare dusting of red on her cheeks. Mia brought her sleeve to cover her mouth and returned fire. Oh, my. Making a move on a poor widow like me when you have Yugen-san already. How indecent, Naruto-san. I think I may need to be careful in the future. The dark look on Naruto's face sucked all the life in the room instantly. Corpses looked more alive than he did. You're a widow, huh? He spoke in a cold monotone so empty that it sent shivers up their spine. My apologies, I'll stop now. Yugen had frozen completely in the face of his reaction, mind racing a mile a minute trying to figure out what was going on. The bead of sweat rolled down Mia's face as she stared deep into the void of his cold, lifeless eyes. This wasn't normal. A normal person would react with maybe a bit of morose and apologize empathetically, but the only thing that could explain his reaction was that it hit close to home. Please, it's alright, Naruto. There's no need to be like that. You couldn't have known. I did lose my husband, but it's been long enough that it isn't an open wound. Please don't beat yourself up over it. You've experienced it too, haven't you? The rictus of death remained on his face as he nodded slowly. I lost my wife and children a long time ago. They were killed right in front of me as I watched helpless, unable to do anything to save them. I watched them be torn apart piece by piece as they struggled. I see it every time I close my eyes. I remember the echoes of their screams. I hear them in my dreams. I can feel their blood staining me. It never washes away. The regret has never left me a day since they died. No matter what I do, it is always there. I apologize for bringing those memories up for you. I know it can't have been easy. Mia's gaze fell away from his morbid visage. He was a kindred spirit. He knew the pain of losing the most important people in your life and being powerless to do anything about it. He knew the unwavering guilt, pain, and regret that was absolute. What was worse was that he had been forced to watch them die. Gods, he had been forced to watch his family die. Sobs racked Mia at the thought. At least with Takedo, she had been informed rather than a witness. She could feel all the emotions of her loss trickling back as she too was caught in traumas of the past. Yugen's heart wrenched painfully as she cried through clenched teeth. She had wanted to know more about her Ashikabi, but this wasn't what she had expected. She hadn't wanted to know this. She didn't want him to have experienced something so awful. She had always known it was going to be something like this, but she had always pushed it away, ignoring the thought. And she absolutely loathed herself for her first reaction being a pang of jealousy at Naruto, not only having been married to another woman, but having kids with him. She was disgusting. But now wasn't the time to allow her self-loathing. If she really cared about him, then she would console him in his time of need. Scooting closer to the blonde, Yugen wrapped him up in a hug, resting her head on his sternum as Naruto stared straight ahead. Naruto slowly started to come back to reality over the next minute, foggy eyes once more becoming cognizant. They never lost the dull look they always had. Shifting in place, Naruto was made aware of the person tightly clinging to his chest, occasionally shaking slightly. He grimaced. He had done it again. What was with him getting all sappy and messy lately? It had been so long since he had lost his cool like this, and yet he had already managed to do it 3 times in the last several days. Was it the bond making him this way, or was it her? He hated this feeling. It was scaring him, this vulnerability. Why was it becoming so much harder to keep up his walls? Tapping Yugen's arm to let her know he was fine, he pulled away from her grasp. When he did, he clenched his teeth sharply. Her eyes were red from crying and full of so much grief. Directed at him. His chest lurched with a feeling he couldn't place, it was even more uncomfortable than before. He would do anything to get away from the situation. He would have to do everything to keep his walls even higher. It was unbearable to experience these things. It needed to go away. He felt like he was going to throw up. Stop looking at me like that. Stop it. Stop looking at me like that. Stop looking at me with those eyes. Stop looking at me, stop looking at me, stop looking at me, stop looking at me, look at it. Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop. The tiny smile worked its way to his face and he squeezed her hands lightly. I'm sorry about that, you too. I didn't mean to get like that. It usually doesn't bother me, but when it hurts, you know. I'm fine now. And Mia, I truly am sorry. That was awful of me. As soon as Mia heard him say her name she too returned to the present. She shook her head, that's enough, Naruto-san. I'll get angry if you keep apologizing, you know. Let's just call this water under the bridge and move on. The tea will taste bad if the atmosphere stays this dreary. Naruto gave Yugen a brief hug and muttered a quiet sorry, his demeanor shifting in an instant. For those who had not been present, they would have no idea that anything had been amiss. Standing, he bowed to Mia and made his way towards the hallway, stopping just long enough to say, I think it would be best if we went ahead and returned home. Thank you for your hospitality. We'll be back bright and early tomorrow, Mia-san. Let's go, Yugen. At his words, Yugen rose sluggishly and gave Mia a polite nod as she left. Mia herself made no movement to acknowledge the situation, maroon eyes trailing their figures as they walked out the front door. She had no idea what to think of what had just occurred. Collecting the empty saucers, her hand froze when she reached Naruto's spot. Where was his cup? That was quite strange. He may have been off as he left, but he didn't strike her as the type to be so careless as to leave with the cup still in hand. No, she hadn't seen it in his hand, so that wasn't it. Sighing, she stood and went to the kitchen to wash what cups she did have. Placing the tray of dirty saucers down by the sink, her eyes widened. Sitting on the counter was Naruto's teacup, clean as a whistle. When had he? At this point, Mia was already becoming desensitized to the many confounding things about the blonde. My, he was mysterious, though. In time, she wanted to unravel the secrets of the worn, disparaged soul that had washed up on her shores. Grabbing the dishes, she set about cleaning. The walk to the subway station was done in silence. Naruto wasn't bothered by the ambience and in fact seemed to be notably grateful for it. Yugen abstained from conversation because she had no idea what to say. What could she say after that? This infuriating man kept making her lose her cool in the worst ways. She was just as uncomfortable as he had been now that the event was said and done. This wasn't her. This sappy, sobbing, emotional mess that he had made her. It had to be the bond. The damn bond that messed with the head of every Sekirei that fell to its whims. She had never, ever been like this prior to her winging. She had fallen prey to the very thing she had hated her entire life and she didn't know what to do. There wasn't anything to do. The best she could do was to be more resilient. To overcome the pressure of the bond. She would be here for him, but as Yugen, not as a bonded Sekirei. She was stronger than this, damn it all. They rode the half-hour subway journey from Arakawa to Setagaya in silence still, neither finding the words to breach the subject. As they got off the train, Naruto finally broke the terse atmosphere. Are you sure you want me to be your Ashikabi? What? Was Yugen's brilliant response. I said are you sure you want me as your Ashikabi? I'm probably one of the worst people you could have as a partner. You'll only be held back if you stay with me. I can break this bond if that's what you want. Shadows danced over Yugen's lowered face. She started walking towards the stairs of the station, leaving Naruto standing there nonplussed. Let's go. You've had your time to be mopey already. We have a lot of packing to do and I'm not going to do it by myself. Naruto was absolutely flabbergasted. He scoffed, tossing his head to the side as his fingertips framed his face. She was right, there were better things to do than wallow in misery. This time, he was the one moving to catch up with her. The front door swung open, allowing the two occupants to walk through its premise. Both of them immediately set about compacting their belongings. Naruto had called a moving company on the way home and gotten a truck scheduled for the next day. It was late, so they wouldn't get much preparation done tonight, but every little bit counted. Luckily, there weren't a terrible lot of things in Naruto's possession. Packing was always unexpectedly arduous, no matter the amount. You don't realize how much you have until you're forced to go through it all. They worked laboriously for a time, putting a number of non-essentials into cardboard boxes and putting them neatly to the side. Naruto hadn't decided what he would do with the furniture just yet, but he had the truck tomorrow no matter what he chose. Naruto cracked his back as he stood up from his last box, sighing happily at the sound of his vertebrae popping. His back was killing him. The hot shower sounds great right about now. After a hard day's work, there's nothing like it. I wonder if Yugen is still working in the kitchen. Checking said room, he found it devoid of life. The boxes she had been filling were tidily kept in the corner of the kitchen where they wouldn't interfere with the room's function. There wasn't as much to do in the kitchen as the living room where he had been working, so chances were she had started one of the other rooms. Maybe she had had the same idea as him and called it quits for the night. As he walked in, he could see the light seeping under the bathroom door, solving the mystery of her whereabouts. That was fine, he would wait until she was finished. Sliding open the door to the balcony, he leaned over the rail in his usual spot. The twinkling lights in the inky darkness were like the sky had been made perpendicular and the lights themselves had become artificial stars. He scoffed at the notion. He missed when the world had been filled with nature and the city had been modest at night. He could see the stars clearly then, in those quiet days. As all things do, the world changed and he too had come to accept that. He didn't hate the sight by any means, it had just come to represent something new. That was one thing that had been a constant of humanity. Evolution. They were always striving to become better and that was something he could respect. Among the many things he despised about humanity, that was a shining beacon. He had seen the best of humanity and the worst. Times when the unconditional love for your fellow man was beautiful and times when the depravity of humankind bled the world dry. It was funny, some of the best people he had known in the ancient age had been those considered villains. The Akatsuki and Madara Uchiha had been people he respected deeply for what it was worth. They had visions and a hope for something better. For some it had become contrived, for others it had been simply misunderstood. They had become the way they were through tragedy and had all changed for it. They weren't bad people. Sasori had allowed himself to die in peace after waiting years for his family to return home. Pain had wanted people to understand the pain of depravity. Madara had wished for an ideal world for everyone, the list went on. Don't get him wrong, Madara had killed many of his friends and he would always hate him for that. He still could respect his ambitions and the fact that in the end, he had been the puppet of another's game as well. He shared the Nidame's sentiment. Damn Uchiha. Except Itachi Uchiha, if there was ever a man he believed deserving of the title Hokage, it was him. He had been an amazing man, an unfortunate victim of life. And then there was his dear friend, Kurama. The legendary nine-tailed fox, strongest of the Bijk. Vessel of eternal hatred and vengeance. At least, until Naruto had broken through to him. Once Naruto had reached him, every terrible thing about Kurama became untrue. The tailed beast was genuinely good. They had been the closest of friends and partners, fighting through the Great War side by side. Out of everyone he had lost, the loss of Kurama had been the most painful. Kurama had been with him for a long time into his wandering, a constant companion through thick and thin, the only thing he had to keep his sanity. Kurama had quite literally been his light in the dark. And then one day he simply disappeared. No sign, no goodbye, nothing. After his disappearance, Naruto had spent nearly 20 years trying to find Kurama and contact the toads of Mount Myaboku with no success. He had truly lost everything. Naruto hated boredom because it meant he had to be alone with himself, something that tortured him to no end. Things were so simple then, beat up the bad guys, protect the innocent, become Hokage, eat ramen, and that was it. Ignorance truly was bliss. Fools and those seen as insane are often the purest of intention when everything is said and done. At least that was how it was in my time. What are you doing out here? His eyes cast backwards to catch sight of the voice's owner. Yugen stood with a towel around her neck and a sheer nightgown over her gorgeous frame. The slight dampness of her body made the gown almost see-through, something that would have been a lucky sight most times. Now was not that time. Taking in the view for old time's sake. It's a sight that I've spent many hours on, but I never tire of it. What makes it so special? That's a bit of a tough question. I wouldn't say it's the view so much as the thoughts that always come from it. Enough about that, let's call it a night. He slipped by Yugen, who remained in place as he left the balcony. As he passed through the room, her voice stopped him. Wait. Yes. You should stay in here. It's your last night in your home, you should at least enjoy your bed. I've used it for the last 2 weeks while you've taken the couch. I'll switch with you. Naruto remained silent, mulling things over for a second. Alright. Only if you join me though. I wouldn't feel right making you sleep on the couch. That really isn't necessary. Take it or leave it. Yugen sighed at the stubborn, maddening blonde and his equally abrasive attitude. Okay. I'm tired. Good night. She flopped onto the bed and rolled over, leaving only her viridian hair poking out. Naruto made for the bathroom, ready to take his long-awaited shower. Minutes later, when he returned refreshed, he quietly slipped into bed beside her, sleep following shortly after. Chapter end. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, peace out.